Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into the blood-soaked, mud-caked and thoroughly miserable era of the Wars of the Roses. Imagine, for a moment, the world outside your window is gone. No streetlights, no traffic, no humming refrigerator. Instead, you see a sky thick with the smoke of wood fires and a horizon broken only by the spire of a stone church and the silhouette of a distant manor house. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and livestock, is all you've ever known. This is 15th century England, a place of stark, simple beauty and even starker, simpler brutality. Statistically speaking, if you were actually living this, you'd be lucky to see your 30th birthday, and the decades-long civil war we're about to explore are going to make that even less likely. So, sweet dreams. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always fun to see where everyone is listening from, so feel free to post your location and what time it is for you in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the cold. Not a biting, dramatic cold, but a persistent, seeping dampness that lives in your bones. It's the kind of chill that clings to the rough wool of your tunic and the straw of your mattress. You share this mattress on the floor of a one-room cottage with the rest of your family. The walls are a simple wattle and daub, a lattice of woven branches packed with a lovely mixture of wet soil, clay, sand and straw. It's surprisingly effective, but in the pre-dawn gloom you can see your breath plume in front of your face. Your alarm clock is the rooster, and your first thought isn't about your to-do list. It's about the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. You swing your legs off the pallet, your bare feet meeting the cold, packed earth floor. The fire in the central hearth has died down to glowing embers, and it's someone's job, maybe yours today, to coax it back to life. Breakfast is already simmering in a pot over the embers, a bubbling, greyish mixture called pottage. It's the fuel of the common folk, a bland but filling stew of boiled grains and whatever vegetables were available from your small garden patch. You eat it with a chunk of dark, heavy rye bread. To wash it down, you have a mug of small ale. It's a weak, low-alcohol beer, but it's far safer than the local water, which is often contaminated and a fast track to dysentery. Even the children drink it. It's less a morning buzz and more a basic survival strategy. Stepping outside, you pull the crude wooden door shut behind you. There's no lock. You own nothing worth stealing. The village is slowly waking around you. The main path is a river of mud, churned by the hooves of oxen and the feet of your neighbours. Chickens and the odd pig wander freely, pecking and rooting for scraps. The air is a rich tapestry of smells. The sharp tang of wood smoke from a dozen chimneys, the sweet scent of hay, the earthy aroma of livestock, and the ever-present, less than charming odour from the communal midden heap, where everyone tosses their waste. No garbage collection day here. Your life is governed by two things, the seasons and the lord of the manor. As a commoner, a peasant, you don't own the land you work. You're a tenant of the local lord, and your rent is paid not in coin but in labour. Most days of the week, you trudge out to the vast open fields that belong to the manor. Your state-of-the-art agricultural equipment for today's task consists of a heavy wooden plow pulled by a pair of straining oxen. Your job is to guide it, to break the stubborn soil hour after hour, under the watchful eye of the reeve, the Lord's appointed manager. He's one of you, but with a bit more authority, and everyone knows it's best to stay on his good side. This is the fundamental structure of your world. The king is a distant, almost mythical figure. Your reality is the Lord, his manor, his fields, and his church. The stone church is the centre of the village, not just spiritually but chronologically. Its bell marks the hours for prayer, which in turn mark the sections of your workday. You don't have a watch. You have the church bell. Historians still argue whether the average peasant felt deeply oppressed by this rigid feudal system, or if it was simply an accepted, unquestioned fact of existence, as natural and inevitable as the rain. For you, it's just life. You were born into it, and you expect to die in it. The work is gruelling, a full-body ache that never truly leaves you. There are no weekends, no paid time off. Your holidays are holy days, dictated by the church calendar. But for now, it's just another day of labour. As the sun climbs higher, you feel the sweat trickle down your back. You pause for a midday meal of more bread, some cheese if you're lucky, and another swig of ale. The conversations with your fellow workers are simple. Talk of the weather, the health of the livestock, a bit of village gossip. As evening approaches and the church bell rings for vespers, you guide the tired oxen back toward the village. Your shoulders burn, your hands are raw, but the day's work is done. You return to your small cottage, to another meal of pottage, perhaps with a bit of salted pork for flavour tonight. In the flickering firelight, the world shrinks to just these four walls. There are no books, you can't read anyway. Maybe a grandparent tells a familiar story, a folk tale passed down through generations. It's a quirky little tale about how placing a hagstone, a stone with a natural hole in it, above your door keeps malicious spirits away. You don't know if it works, but everyone does it. Why take the chance? You lie down on your straw pallet, the day's exhaustion a heavy blanket. Your worries are immediate and small scale, a sick cow, a coming storm, the Lord's mood. You're utterly unaware that far away, in the gilded halls of London and Westminster, powerful men with names like York and Lancaster are nursing grievances and sharpening their ambitions. Their quarrels are as distant and irrelevant to you as the stars. You fall asleep to the familiar sounds of the village settling down, blissfully ignorant that this fragile, predictable peace is about to be shattered forever. That fragile peace you fell asleep in doesn't last. A few weeks pass, the rhythm of ploughing and planting, of pottage and weak ale, continuing its steady, predictable beat. But then, a subtle shift occurs. It's not one single event, but a series of small, unsettling changes. A travelling merchant passing through the village speaks with a hushed urgency in the alehouse. The parish priest, a man whose sermons are usually comforting tirades against minor sins, starts including vaguely worded prayers for the stability of the realm and the health of the king. Even the reeve, a man you've known your whole life, seems more on edge, his orders sharper, his patience thinner. The air itself feels heavier, thick with a new kind of uncertainty. The whispers eventually coalesce into a story, a frightening and confusing one that trickles down from the great halls of London. The king, Henry VI, is unwell. This isn't a common sickness like a fever or the pox. The story you piece together from tavern gossip and overheard conversations is that the king's mind has left his body. They say he sits in a chair, staring into space, not speaking, not eating unless food is placed in his mouth, not reacting to anything or anyone. He is a living statue. Some say it's a curse, others say God is punishing him, and by extension, England. Historians still argue whether his condition was a form of catatonic schizophrenia or profound depressive stupor, perhaps inherited from his French grandfather Charles VI, who famously believed he was made of glass. For you, the clinical diagnosis doesn't matter. What matters is that the throne is empty, even though a man is sitting on it. An empty throne is like a carcass in the wild. It attracts predators. You start to hear two names spoken more and more, always in low voices: York and Somerset. To you, these are just names of powerful, distant lords, like characters in a story. But you learn they are the two most powerful men in the kingdom, and they despise each other. Richard, the Duke of York, is the king's cousin, a man with royal blood of his own. The whispers say he's capable, strong, and deeply frustrated by the mess the country is in. He wants to be named Protector of the Realm, to rule in the king's name until he recovers. To hear some tell it, he's the only one who can save England from falling apart. Sounds like a pretty good campaign slogan. Then there's the Duke of Somerset, the king's favourite, a man who was essentially running the country before the king's mind went on its extended vacation. He and his allies, the Beauforts, are terrified of York. They know if York gets power, they'll lose their influence, their fortunes, and maybe even their heads. They paint York as a traitorous schemer, a wolf who wants to steal the crown for himself. You don't know who to believe. Frankly, you don't care. What does a squabble between two dukes have to do with you? But then, it starts to connect. Your local lord, the man who owns the land you farm, owes his allegiance to one of these factions. Suddenly, his political opinions, and the lingering smoke from the hearth. The floor is cold, hard-packed dirt, and hygiene is a concept you wouldn't even have a word for. You don't have a bathroom. The best you have is a bucket in the corner for nighttime use, which is unceremoniously emptied onto the midden heap in the morning. Outside, the village streets are an open sewer. People toss their household waste, including the contents of their chamber pots, right out the door. The mud underfoot isn't just mud. It's a rich organic soup of dirt, animal droppings and human waste. You wear simple leather shoes or wooden pattens, like little platforms, to try and keep your feet out of the worst of it. But it's a losing battle. The stench, especially in the summer heat, is overpowering, a constant assault on your senses. You don't notice it the way a modern person would, of course. You've grown up with it. It's the smell of home, a rather questionable home fragrance, but home nonetheless. Personal cleanliness is a luxury. Water has to be hauled by hand from the village well or a nearby stream, and it's a chore. Heating it is an even bigger one, requiring precious firewood. A full-body bath is a rare event, perhaps happening a few times a year. Your daily wash consists of a quick splash of cold water on your hands and face. Soap exists, but it's a harsh, lye-based substance made from animal fat and ash, more suited for scouring laundry than for skin. Speaking of laundry, your 1 or 2 sets of woolen or linen clothes are washed in the stream, beaten against rocks with that same coarse soap, and laid out on bushes to dry. The idea of changing your underwear daily would be laughable. You're lucky if you own any. This lack of sanitation isn't just unpleasant, it's deadly. Germ theory is centuries away. You believe illness is caused by an imbalance of the 4 bodily humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, or perhaps by miasma, which is bad air emanating from rotting matter. A mainstream historical fact of the era is that life expectancy at birth was brutally low, hovering around 30 to 35 years. While this is skewed by incredibly high infant mortality rates, surviving childhood was no guarantee of a long life. A simple cut could be a death sentence. Without antibiotics, an infection could quickly turn septic, leading to a fever, amputation or death. The food you eat is a monotonous cycle of starches. That pottage is your mainstay, day in and day out. Fresh meat is a rare treat, usually reserved for feast days or after the autumn slaughter, when animals that couldn't be fed through the winter were killed. The meat would then be heavily salted or smoked for preservation. Fresh fruit is seasonal, and vegetables are whatever you can grow in your small garden plot. Onions, leeks, cabbages, peas and beans. Your diet is calorie deficient and lacks crucial vitamins, leading to a host of chronic health issues. Scurvy, with its bleeding gums and aching joints, was common in late winter when fresh produce was gone. Dental health is appalling. With no toothbrushes and a diet heavy on coarse bread, your teeth are worn, cracked and often rotting. A toothache isn't an inconvenience. It's a source of debilitating agony that could only be cured by having the tooth yanked out by the local barber surgeon, or even the blacksmith with no anaesthetic. It's a miracle anyone ever smiled in a family portrait. Oh, wait, become your political opinions. There's no room for nuance or independent thought. If your lord is a Yorkist, then so are you, and you'd better not be caught saying a kind word about Somerset in the alehouse. Allegiance isn't a choice, it's a geographical fact of your survival. The core of the problem, you hear, is not just the king's health, but a disaster across the sea in France. For 100 years, English kings had claimed the throne of France, and the long war to secure it had become a part of the national identity. But it's just ended in a catastrophic English defeat. A mainstream historical fact that everyone, even you in your muddy village, would have known is that the final English stronghold of Bordeaux had fallen. All the land won by legendary kings like Henry V was gone. They say the news of this final, humiliating loss is what shattered King Henry's fragile mind. He simply couldn't process the failure. The absurdity of it all becomes clear one evening when a friar, seeking shelter for the night, shares a truly bizarre story from the royal court. He tells you that after the king had been in his silent state for many months, his wife, Queen Margaret of Anjou, gave birth to a son and heir, Edward. To celebrate, and in a desperate attempt to rouse the king, the infant prince was brought before him. The Duke of Buckingham held the baby up to the king, but Henry just stared blankly, not a flicker of recognition in his eyes. They tried again and again, but there was nothing. The father didn't recognise his own son. The story is told with a sense of tragedy, but you can't help but find a sliver of dark humour in the image of these powerful men trying to get a reaction out of a human statue with a baby. This is the state of your country. It's a ship without a captain, tossed on a stormy sea, while the 2 first mates are drawing knives on the quarterdeck, arguing over who gets to hold the wheel. The squabbling of these nobles isn't about patriotic duty. It's a raw, naked power grab, dressed up in the language of loyalty and justice. You can feel the consequences brewing. Prices for goods like salt and iron are slowly creeping up. Your lord has sent word that he needs to raise funds for the defence of the realm, which sounds an awful lot like a new tax you can't afford. The world, which felt so solid and predictable just a season ago, now feels like it's tilting on its axis. You go to bed each night with the names York and Lancaster echoing in your mind, no longer distant fairy tale figures, but the architects of a coming storm that you're beginning to realise you won't be able to avoid. The looming political storm is a terrifying prospect, but for now it remains a distant thunder. The more immediate and relentless enemy is your daily existence. Before any soldier sets foot in your village, life is already a struggle for survival, a constant battle against filth, discomfort, and exhaustion. You wake up on your straw-stuffed sack and the first thing you smell is stale bodies. Your home offers little comfort. The single room is crowded, smoky and dark. The only light comes from the open door, the smoke hole in the roof, and the flickering flames of the central hearth. Windows are rare, and if you have them, they're small, unglazed openings with wooden shutters. When they're open, they let in wind and rain. When they're closed, they plunge the room into near total darkness. In this gloom, you share your living space not only with your family, but with an assortment of creatures. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are constant companions, living in your clothes, your hair, and your straw bedding. Mice and rats scurry in the thatch of the roof, and then there's the work. It is relentless, back-breaking physical labour that starts when you're old enough to walk and ends only when you are too old or infirm to continue. You don't have a career path. You're what your father was. If he was a ploughman, so are you. If he was a thatcher, you learn to thatch. The work is not just hard, but incredibly dangerous. A slip of an axe, a kick from an ox, falling from a poorly made ladder, any of these could leave you maimed and unable to work. And if you can't work, you can't eat. There is no social safety net, no disability insurance. Your only support is your family and the parish, which could offer a pittance of charity if it had the resources. Historians still argue about the true nature of medieval happiness. Did the strong community bonds and deep religious faith provide a profound sense of contentment that we lack today? Or was life, as the philosopher Thomas Hobbes would later write, truly solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short? From your perspective, crouching in the mud, you're not thinking philosophically. You're thinking about your aching back, the hole in your shoe, and the gnawing hunger in your belly. It's a life lived on the very edge of subsistence. One quirky tidbit you might encounter is the legal concept of the pinfold. This was a small, hedged or walled enclosure in the village where stray livestock was kept. If your pig wandered into your neighbour's garden and ate his cabbages, the reeve would impound your pig in the pinfold. You'd have to pay a fine to get it back. It was a simple, practical system for resolving minor disputes in a world where a pig was a major asset, and a few cabbages could be the difference between a full belly and a hungry night. It's a small detail, but it paints a picture of a society where every resource was precious, and every rule was designed for pure, hard-nosed pragmatism. This is the brutal baseline of your existence. The war hasn't even started, and already every day is a fight. The daily grind against filth and hunger is your constant companion. But there's another, less tangible hardship that shapes your world. The law. Or rather, the often arbitrary and terrifying application of it. You live under a system where justice isn't a blindfolded lady with a scale. It's confess your crime to the coroner and abjure the realm. This means you agree to be exiled. You would be stripped to your undergarments, made to carry a wooden cross, and forced to walk to a designated port city, and take the first available ship out of England, never to return. If you strayed from the designated path on your journey to the port, you could be killed on sight by anyone who found you. It was a life sentence of banishment, a legal fiction that allowed the kingdom to purge itself of a criminal without a messy trial. Historians still argue about the true function of sanctuary. Was it a merciful escape valve in a brutal legal system, or a chaotic loophole that allowed dangerous criminals to get away with their crimes? To the people of a village, having a confessed murderer living in their church for over a month, knowing he would soon be walking through their county, was a source of profound anxiety. The law isn't just about crime, it's also about control. Sumptuary laws dictated what you could wear based on your social class. As a peasant, you were legally forbidden from wearing certain colours or fabrics. like silk or purple cloth, which were reserved for the nobility. It was a way of making the social hierarchy visible, a constant reminder of your place. Another quirky tidbit is the existence of forest law, a separate and much harsher set of rules that applied to the vast tracts of land designated as royal forests. These weren't just woods, they were the king's private hunting preserves. If you were caught poaching a deer in a royal forest, the punishment could be blinding or mutilation. Even gathering firewood or grazing your pig there could result in a crippling fine. The forest, a potential source of food and fuel that could save your family from starving, was legally off limits and guarded by armed foresters. In this world, justice is personal, swift, and often violent. You learn to be careful, to keep your head down, and not to attract the attention of those in power. You see a neighbour get locked in the stocks, his ankles and wrists clamped in a wooden frame in the village centre, for a minor offence, left for a day to be pelted with mud and rotten vegetables by passers-by. It's both entertainment and a warning. This is the legal landscape you navigate every day, a web of rules designed to protect the property and power of the wealthy, where your own rights are fragile and your life is cheap. The impending civil war will not create this injustice, it will simply pour gasoline on a fire that is already burning. The abstract fears of a failing king and squabbling dukes begin to take on a terrifying physical form. The change is slow at first, like the turning of the tide. It starts with strangers. You're used to seeing the occasional travelling merchant, friar or pilgrim on the road near your village, but now there are new faces, and they move with a different kind of purpose. They are men in dusty. Your local lord holding a very big stick, and his mood on any given day matters more than any written code. You understand from a very young age that what is right and what is legal are two very different things, and the gap between them is filled with fear. The most common form of justice you encounter is the manorial court, presided over by the lord or his steward. This isn't a grand affair in a stone courthouse. It might be held in the manor's great hall, or even just outdoors under a large oak tree. This court deals with the everyday infractions of village life. Remember that pinfold for stray animals? This is where that fine would be formally levied. It also handles disputes between tenants, accusations of shoddy work on the lord's land, brewing ale that isn't up to standard, or failing to use the lord's mill to grind your grain, a common requirement that was basically a tax on every loaf of bread you baked. For you, getting called before this court is a nerve-wracking experience. You stand, cap in hand, before the steward, trying to look humble and respectful, knowing that your livelihood depends on his judgment. There are no lawyers arguing your case. It's your word against your accusers, and the Lord's representative decides who is more believable. For more serious crimes, theft, assault, murder, things get much more severe. These are handled by royal courts, but the process is slow, fraught with peril, and heavily stacked against a person of your low status. A mainstream historical fact is the existence of the hue-and-cry. If a crime was committed, the victim or witnesses were legally obligated to raise a loud alarm. Everyone within earshot was then required to stop what they were doing and chase down the suspect. It was a community-based policing system, a human dragnet. If you heard the cry and didn't join the chase, you could be fined. It sounds efficient, but imagine the chaos. A shouting mob chasing a terrified individual through the fields with no real proof, just an accusation. If you are the one accused, your prospects are grim. You might be held in a local lockup, which is less a cell and more a foul, dark pit, while awaiting the arrival of the itinerant royal justices who toured the country. The concept of innocent until proven guilty doesn't really exist in the way you'd understand it. A popular but largely outdated notion is that trial by ordeal was still common, where guilt or innocence was determined by surviving a painful test, like carrying a hot iron. While this practice had been officially condemned by the Church centuries earlier, the principle behind it, that God would intervene to show the truth, still lingered in the popular imagination. More common in your time is trial by jury, but not a jury of your peers in the modern sense. The jury would be made up of local men of slightly higher standing, freeholders and minor gentry, who are expected not to be impartial, but to already know the reputations of everyone involved. If you were known as a troublemaker, your chances were slim regardless of the evidence. It was a justice system based on character and social standing as much as on facts. Then there's the bizarre and terrifying reality of sanctuary. If you commit a serious crime, you can run to the nearest church. If you can reach the consecrated ground and grab the sanctuary ring, a large metal ring often found on the church door, you are legally protected from arrest for 40 days. During that time, you're fed by the parish. At the end of the 40 days, you must. You've known your whole life, says something quiet, telling the retainer to show some respect. The retainer, drunk and full of bravado, shoves him hard. The old man stumbles back, hitting his head on a wooden beam. For a terrifying moment, the room is silent. Then the retainer's captain steps in, cuffs his man on the head, and tosses a coin on the floor. It's not an apology, it's a payment, an assertion of power. They can do what they want. They are the Lord's men, and the Lord's law is the only one that matters now. Historians still argue about the extent to which the common populace was politically engaged. Did they truly care about the dynastic claims of York versus Lancaster, or were they just trying to survive the violence regardless of its source? From your perspective, the complex genealogy of the royal family is meaningless. What's meaningful is the sword at a drunken retainer's hip. What's meaningful is the fear you feel when you see a group of armed men riding toward your village, trying to quickly identify the badge on their sleeves. Is it your lord's badge, meaning they might leave you alone? Or is it the enemy's, meaning you should run and hide? A quirky detail of the time that now takes on a sinister new meaning is the practice of archery practice. For centuries, a royal edict had required all able-bodied men to practice with the longbow on Sundays after church. It was meant to maintain a ready pool of skilled archers for wars against the French. Now, this skill is being turned inward. The men you used to compete with in friendly archery contests at the village butts are now being eyed by the reeve as potential military assets. The simple sport has become a prelude to civil war. The whispers of war are no longer whispers. They are the tramp of marching feet on the road, the sight of armour being polished in the manor courtyard, the nervous glances between neighbours in the market. The peace you knew, imperfect as it was, is over. The storm is no longer on the horizon. First rains of violence and fear have begun to fall on your small, insignificant village, and you're about to be swept away in the flood. The day you've been dreading arrives on a cold, grey morning. It doesn't come with a formal declaration or a grand proclamation. It comes in the form of the reeve and two of the Lord's liveried retainers standing at the door of your cottage. There's no knock. They just pull the door open, filling the doorway and blocking the meagre light. The reeve, a man you once shared ale with, doesn't meet your eyes. He holds a piece of parchment, a commission of array. It's a royal order, technically from the king, but you know it's been procured by your lord to legally raise troops for his faction. You're being summoned. The word they use is request, but the two armed men standing behind the reeve make it clear that this is a request you can't refuse. You and every other. Leather jacks carrying swords or bills, a nasty-looking polearm with a hook and a spike. They travel in small groups, their eyes scanning the fields and houses with a calculating coldness that makes your stomach clench. They aren't soldiers in a formal army, not yet. They are retainers, household men belonging to your lord, or worse, to a neighbouring lord of the opposing faction. The whispers in the alehouse grow more specific, more urgent. Names of battles, small at first, begin to circulate. A place called St Albans is mentioned. The story, pieced together from a dozen fragmented accounts, is that the Duke of York and the Duke of Somerset finally came to blows. It wasn't a grand battle, more of a bloody street fight in a town not so far away. They say the fighting was fierce, right in the marketplace, and that Somerset himself was cornered and cut down in the doorway of an inn. The news is shocking. A great lord, a favourite of the king, killed in a brawl. The unspoken rule that the nobility don't kill each other has been broken. The first blood has been drawn, and it's the blood of a prince of the House of Lancaster. This news changes the atmosphere completely. The tension that was a low hum now becomes a high-pitched whine of anxiety. Your own lord, hearing of the Yorkist victory at St Albans, grows bolder. He sends his reeve around to every tenant, demanding a contribution of grain and coin for the common defence. It's not a request. Your meagre savings, the few coins you'd hidden in a pot under the floorboards, are now gone. You watch the lord's men ride out, their leather armour gleaming, carrying his standard, the rampant lion, or the white boar, or whatever symbol your local potentate has chosen. You are supposed to feel pride, to cheer for your lord's cause. Instead, you just feel a cold dread. You know that for every armed man riding out, there's an enemy armed man somewhere else, and you are caught in the middle. The parish priest's sermons become more overtly political. He speaks of the righteousness of the House of York, of cleansing the kingdom of the corrupt councillors around the poor, sick king. Or, if your lord is a Lancastrian, he rails against the treacherous ambition of the Duke of York, a man who would plunge the realm into chaos for his own gain. The church, your place of sanctuary and spiritual comfort, now feels like another tool of the powerful, reinforcing the divisions that are tearing the world apart. You look at your neighbours during the service wondering, is Thomas, whose wife is cousin to a man on a Lancastrian estate, truly on our side? Can you trust anyone? The seeds of suspicion are planted in the fertile ground of fear. A mainstream historical fact of this period is the concept of livery and maintenance. Great lords maintained vast private armies of retainers, identified by the lord's badge or livery, like the Percy Crescent or the Neville Saltire. These men were fed, housed and armed by the lord in exchange for their military service. This system, known as bastard feudalism, effectively bypassed the king's authority and allowed powerful nobles to wage private wars. The Wars of the Roses were, in many ways, just these private armies clashing on a national scale. You see these liveried retainers everywhere now, swaggering through the village as if they own it. And in a way, they do. One evening, a group of them commandeer the alehouse, drinking heavily, their laughter loud and aggressive. One of them makes a crude remark to the alewife's daughter. Her father, a man, able-bodied man in the village between the ages of 16 and 60, are to present yourselves at the manor house by midday. No excuses. Your wife clutches your arm, her face pale with terror. You have a family to feed, fields to plough, animals to tend. What will happen to them? The reeve just shakes his head mutely. It's not his decision. The great lords are playing their game, and you are one of the pawns. You trudge to the manor house, joining a sombre procession of your neighbours, husbands, sons and fathers, all with the same look of grim resignation. There's no patriotic fervour here, no eagerness for glory, just the quiet fear of the unknown. In the manor courtyard you're lined up like cattle. The lord's captain, a grizzled man-at-arms with a scar that splits his left eyebrow, walks the line, inspecting you. He pokes your chest, checks your arms, tells you to open your mouth to see the state of your teeth. You feel less like a man and more like a horse being considered for purchase. A few men are sent away, the very old, the clearly infirm, the village idiot who wouldn't know which end of a spear to hold. You're not so lucky. You're deemed fit to fight, or, more accurately, fit to die. Now comes the question of equipment. The lord is supposed to arm his men, but the reality is far from a neat uniform. A mainstream historical fact is that English armies of this period were not professional standing forces. They were feudal levies, hastily assembled and poorly equipped. The wealthiest men, the knights and esquires, arrive in their own full-plate armour, a shining, articulated fortress of steel worth more than your entire village. The lord's household retainers have good gear, a metal helmet, a padded jack or a brigandine, a type of jacket with small steel plates riveted inside, and a proper weapon like a poleaxe or a longsword. And then there's you. You're handed a jack, a padded coat made of dozens of layers of linen or canvas stitched together. It's stiff, smelly, and meant to absorb the force of a blow, though you have serious doubts about its ability to stop a determined arrow or sword thrust. For a helmet, you're given a simple iron skull cap, or maybe just a boiled leather cap. Your primary weapon is a bill. It's essentially a farmer's tool, a billhook, mounted on a 6-foot pole. It's designed to hook a knight off his horse or pull a man down, but it feels clumsy and unwieldy in your hands. You've spent your life with a plough handle, not a polearm. Some of your neighbours are just given a long spear. The archers, those who are good at the Sunday practices, are issued a yew longbow and a sheaf of arrows. They are the most valuable common soldiers on the field. You, with your glorified farming tool, are just expendable infantry. Cannon fodder. You might as well be given a pointy stick and a harsh word. You look ridiculous and you know it. It's a motley crew, a patchwork army of farmers and blacksmiths dressed in cast-off equipment. There's no training, no drills on marching in formation or battlefield manoeuvres. You're given your weapon, a badge with the Lord's crest, to sew onto your coat, so your own side doesn't kill you by mistake, and told to be ready to march at dawn, that's it. You are now officially a soldier in the Wars of the Roses. That night, you sit in your cottage, the bill leaning against the wall, an alien and menacing presence in the small room. Your wife silently mends a tear in your tunic. Your children stare at, You with wide, frightened eyes. You try to offer words of reassurance you don't feel. You'll be back soon, you say. It's probably just a show of force. They won't really fight. But you remember the story of St Albans, of the Duke of Somerset being hacked to death. You know you're lying. One quirky yet grim tidbit of soldiering you might learn that night is about your own teeth. An older man who fought in France tells you that if you're knocked out on the battlefield, the first thing a looter will do is break your jaw to get at your teeth, as they were sometimes used as a form of crude ivory, or sold to the wealthy to be fashioned into primitive dentures. It's a horrifyingly practical piece of advice. Try not to get knocked unconscious. Historians still argue about the motivations of the common soldier in these wars. Was it loyalty to their lord, a sense of feudal duty that we can no longer comprehend? Or was it simple coercion, the knowledge that refusal meant being branded a traitor, losing your land, and potentially being hanged? For you, the answer is simple. You're not here for York or for Lancaster. You're not here for honour or for glory. You're here because a man with a sword told you to be. Your survival instinct is at war with itself. Refusing to go is certain ruin, but going is probable death. As dawn breaks, you say your goodbyes. You hug your wife, trying to memorise the feel of her. You look at your children's faces, burning the image into your mind. You don't know if you will ever see them again. You march out of the village in a shambling column, leaving behind everything you have ever known. The cold morning air bites at your face. Ahead of you is a road leading to a battle you don't understand, to fight for a cause you don't believe in, alongside men who are just as terrified as you are. Your life as a farmer is over. Your new brutal life as a soldier has just begun. The march is a special kind of misery. It's not the sharp, terrifying misery of battle, but a slow, grinding one that wears you down physically and mentally. For days you trudge along rutted tracks that barely qualify as roads. The flimsy leather of your shoes, never meant for this kind of punishment, quickly wears through. You walk in mud, you sleep in mud, and you eat food that tastes like mud. The nights are the worst. You huddle under a hedge or in a ditch, wrapped in your thin cloak, shivering in the damp cold. There are no tents for men like you. The nights are filled with the sounds of coughing, men crying out in their sleep, and the ever-present gnawing fear of what lies ahead. Your rations are meagre, a piece of hard, dry bread and some salted meat or fish that is more salt than meat. You drink water from streams you share with hundreds of other men and their horses, a perfect recipe for dysentery, the bloody flux that can kill a man just as surely as a sword. You see men falling out of the column every day, too sick or exhausted to go on. They are left where they fall. The army doesn't have the time or the resources to care for them. It's a brutal lesson in the economics of war. Your life is less valuable than the time it would take to help you. After what feels like an eternity, you arrive. You crest a low ridge and see it, the enemy army spread across the opposite slope. It's a terrifying and strangely beautiful sight. A forest of banners flutters in the wind, a sea of polished steel helmets and armour glints in the weak sunlight. The sheer number of men is overwhelming, thousands upon thousands. Your own army is a mirror image, and you're just one tiny, insignificant part of it. The lords and knights are prancing about on their great war horses, shouting orders, their voices thin against the vast open sky. The air is thick with a strange energy, a humming, vibrating tension that you feel in your teeth. The battle begins not with a heroic charge, but with a sound. It's a deep, guttural roar from thousands of throats on both sides, a primal scream of fear and aggression. Then comes a sound like a giant tearing a sheet of canvas, the sky-filling hiss of the first flight of arrows. A mainstream historical fact is the devastating power of the English longbow. A skilled archer could loose 10 to 12 arrows a minute, and an army could send a storm of tens of thousands of arrows into the enemy ranks before the lines even met. You see men around you fall, screaming, clutching at arrows embedded in their faces, chests and limbs. You raise your small shield, if you are even given one, or just hunch your shoulders and pray. There is no skill in this, only luck. Then the order comes to advance. You move forward in a great jostling mass of men, slipping in the churned-up mud which is already slick with blood. The ground is littered with the dead and dying from the arrow storm. You step over a man from your own village, his face a mask of agony, an arrow protruding from his eye. There's no time to stop, no time to help. The press of bodies from behind pushes you forward, into the meat grinder. The two lines crash together with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. all order, all formation dissolves instantly. This is not a duel of skilled swordsmen. This is a brawl, a riot, a desperate hacking, stabbing scrum. The noise is a deafening cacophony, the shriek of metal on metal, the wet thud of blows landing on flesh, the screams of the wounded, the guttural shouts of men fighting for their lives. Your world shrinks to a few feet around you. Your clumsy bill feels like a useless stick. You jab and swing wildly, more out of panic than any tactical thought. A man lunges at you, his face a contorted mask of rage, his sword raised. You stumble backward, tripping over a body. You fall hard, the wind knocked out of you. He is on you in an instant, his sword descending. You squeeze your eyes shut, bracing for the end, but the blow never lands. You open your eyes to see another man from your levy, a blacksmith you barely knew, slam his own bill into the side of the enemy soldier's head. There's a horrific wet crack, and the man collapses on top of you. The blacksmith, without a word, pulls you to your feet and is swallowed back into the chaos. You have no time to thank him, or even process what happened. Someone else is already coming at you. This is the reality of medieval battle that no heroic ballad ever captures. It's clumsy, exhausting, and deeply personal. You're not fighting a faceless enemy. You're fighting a man whose terrified, sweat-streaked face is inches from your own. You can smell his breath, see the desperation in his eyes. Every swing is a gamble for your life. Historians still argue about the true nature of combat in this period. Was it a series of individual duels within a larger melee, or a more cohesive push of pike, where formations tried to shove each other off the field? From your vantage point in the mud, it's just pure, terrifying chaos. A quirky and frankly pathetic aspect of the fighting is how much of it is just shoving. With everyone packed so tightly, there's often not enough room to swing a sword or a poleaxe effectively. Much of the battle becomes a brutal pushing match, with men trying to knock their opponents off balance to create an opening for a quick stab with a dagger. You find yourself straining, shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, trying to push a wall of enemy flesh backward. It's less like a battle, and more like the most violent rugby scrum in history. Hours pass in a blur of terror and adrenaline. Your arms burn with exhaustion, your throat is raw from shouting, and your mind is numb. You operate on pure instinct, a cornered animal fighting for survival. You don't know who is winning, you can't see the banners or the knights anymore. All you can see is the man in front of you, and then, as slowly as it began, you feel a shift. The pressure from the enemy line lessens. Men around you are shouting, a different kind of shout, one of victory. The enemy is breaking, they're turning and running. The battle is over, but your brutal day is not. The shouts of victory are a strange, hollow sound in your ears. You stand, leaning on your bill, every muscle in your body screaming in protest. Your breath comes in ragged, shallow gasps. The adrenaline that fueled you through the fight drains away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a trembling that you can't control. The immediate threat is gone, but the horror is just beginning to settle in. You look around, and for the first time, you truly see the battlefield. It's a vision from hell. The green field you stood on that morning is gone, replaced by a churned, bloody quagmire. The ground is carpeted with bodies, thousands of them, lying in grotesque, unnatural positions. They are not peaceful figures at rest. They are twisted shapes of agony. Men are entangled with dead horses, their limbs caught in a macabre embrace. The air, which before was filled with the sounds of combat, is now thick with the groans and whimpers of this wounded. It's a sound you will never forget. A chorus of pain that rises from the field like a foul mist. You see the blacksmith who saved you. He's sitting on the ground a few yards away, staring blankly at his hands, which are covered in blood. You walk over to him, your legs unsteady. You open your mouth to thank him, but no words come out. You just clap him on the shoulder, a gesture that feels small and inadequate. He doesn't seem to notice. He's lost in a world of his own shock. Many of the survivors are like this, wandering aimlessly, their eyes wide and unfocused, as if they've seen something so terrible their minds have temporarily shut down. Now, the work of the aftermath begins. The knights and high-ranking men are seen to first. Their squires carefully remove their armour, and surgeons, often men with more confidence than skill, are brought to tend their wounds. For a common soldier like you, there is no such care. If you are wounded, you are on your own. You see a man from your village trying to bind a deep gash on his arm with a strip of cloth torn from his tunic. Another sits, trying to pull an arrowhead out of his own thigh, his face contorted in a silent scream of pain. There are no medics, no field hospitals, no morphine. If your wound is serious, your best hope is a slow, agonising death from infection or blood loss. One of the most brutal realities of the day is the fate of the enemy wounded. As your victorious army moves across the field, there is no mercy. A mainstream historical fact from battles like Towton was the order for no quarter. This meant that surrendering opponents, especially common soldiers, were not to be taken prisoner. Prisoners were a liability. They had to be fed and guarded. It was easier to kill them. You watch in horror as your own comrades, men you marched and fought alongside, move systematically among the fallen enemy, finishing off anyone still moving. A quick stab with a dagger, a brutal smash with a mace. It's a gruesome, methodical slaughter. You are told it is necessary, a way to ensure the enemy cannot regroup. To you, it just looks like murder. You are put to a different task, looting. This is your payment. You're ordered to strip the dead, friend and foe alike, of anything valuable. You move hesitantly at first, repulsed by the idea of touching the dead. But hunger and the grim reality of your situation overcome your squeamishness. You pull a decent pair of shoes off a dead man, trying not to look at his face. You find a small coin purse on another. You take daggers, belts, anything that can be sold or used. It's a grim, dehumanizing task. You're a vulture, picking over the remains of a feast of death. Even your own lord partakes in a version of this. The most valuable prizes on the field are high-ranking enemy knights, who weren't killed but captured. They could be ransomed for enormous sums of money, a practice that highlights the cynical, business-like nature of noble warfare. As you work, you come across a strange, quirky tidbit of battlefield medicine. You see a man with a nasty wound on his leg, smearing it with a thick paste of cobwebs and dung. He claims it will stop the bleeding and ward off evil spirits that cause infection. While it sounds disgusting, historians note that some moulds found in such substances, like penicillin, could have had a minor antiseptic effect, a case of a folk remedy accidentally stumbling upon a sliver of scientific truth. It's a desperate measure in a desperate time. The dead are too numerous to be buried in individual graves. They are gathered up and thrown into massive pits, a tangled mass of anonymous limbs. There are no prayers, no ceremonies, except perhaps a quick blessing from a priest over the entire pit. Your neighbours, the men you shared a joke with on the march, are now just part of a heap of rotting flesh. Their families back home will never know how they died or where they lie. They will simply vanish from the world, their fate a subject of rumour and speculation for years to come. Historians still argue about the true casualty figures for many of these battles. Chroniclers of the time often exaggerated the numbers for dramatic effect, but even the most conservative estimates are staggering. At a battle like Towton, fought in a snowstorm, it's believed that tens of thousands of men were killed in a single day, possibly representing as much as 1% of the entire population of England at the time. It was a slaughter on an almost unimaginable scale. As dusk falls, the field is finally quiet save for the crackle of campfires. You sit by a fire, the stolen shoes on your feet, the stolen coins heavy in your pocket. You don't feel like a victor. You feel empty, hollowed out. You have survived. But a part of you died out there on the field today. The man who left his cottage a few weeks ago, the farmer who worried about the weather and his crops, is gone forever. In his place is a man who has seen the absolute depths of human brutality, who has stepped over the bodies of his friends, and who knows that this victory isn't the end. It's just the prelude to the next battle, and the next, and the next. The war is far from over, and your journey through its horrors has only just begun. You survived the battle, a fact that feels more like a statistical anomaly than a testament to your skill. But the army doesn't stay on the bloody field forever. It moves on, a great hungry beast, and your village lies in its path. You might think that the return of your lord's victorious army would be a moment of relief, a homecoming. You would be wrong. Whether the army marching through your town is technically friend or foe makes terrifyingly little difference. An army on the move operates on a simple, brutal principle. It takes what it needs, and what it needs is food, drink, shelter, and entertainment. Your first sign that something is wrong is the sound. It's a low rumble at first, the sound of thousands of marching feet and horses' hooves, far different from the small company of men who left weeks ago. As they get closer, the disciplined column you were part of dissolves into a scattered, swaggering mob. The men are flush with the arrogance of survival, their fear from the battle replaced by a dangerous, reckless bravado. They are no longer your neighbours, they are an occupying force. They swarm into the village like locusts. Your carefully tended garden, the one your wife has been desperately trying to maintain in your absence, is trampled in minutes. The chickens you are raising are snatched up, their necks wrung, and quickly spitted over a hastily built fire. The door to your cottage is kicked in, not out of malice, but simple convenience. A group of retainers you've never seen before barge in and declare it their quarters for the night. Your wife and children are shoved into a corner, their faces masks of terror. You stand there, helpless. You're technically on their side, wearing the same lord's badge, but you are a common foot soldier, a peasant. They are men-at-arms, part of the lord's inner circle. You have no authority, no power to stop them. The alehouse is the first to be emptied, the barrels broken open, and the weak ale drunk with gusto. When that's gone, they come for private stores. They find the small barrel of cider your family was saving for the winter, and drain it without a second thought. They tear through your meagre belongings, not necessarily looking for valuables, but tossing things aside with careless indifference. The thin line between an army and a band of robbers has completely evaporated. This behaviour, known historically as purveyance, or pillage, was an unofficial but universally accepted part of military life. Soldiers were poorly paid, if at all, and they were expected to live off the land. This meant taking what they wanted from the civilian population. The most terrifying part is the casual violence. A dog barks at a soldier, and he kicks it so hard it whimpers and crawls away, its leg broken. A man tries to protest as soldiers pull the thatch from his roof to use as bedding, and he is knocked unconscious for his trouble. There is no one to appeal to. The lord and his knights are quartered in the manor house, enjoying the best of everything, blissfully unaware, or more likely willfully ignorant, of the chaos their men are unleashing on the people they are supposed to be protecting. You watch as your wife tries to shield your children from the sight of the drunken, shouting men who now fill your home. The threat of sexual violence hangs heavy and unspoken in the air. While mass rape was not as systematically deployed as in some later wars, women were incredibly vulnerable. A pretty daughter or young wife was in constant danger from men who had been surrounded by death and violence for weeks, their inhibitions worn away by trauma and alcohol. Your only defence is to try to make your family as invisible as possible. A quirky but sinister manifestation of this lawlessness is the theft of household goods for absurdly mundane purposes. You might see a soldier walking away with your front door not to be malicious, but because he's decided it will make a fine tabletop for his game of dice. Another might take the pot your pottage was cooked in, simply because he needs something to carry water for his horse. Your life is being dismantled piece by piece, not in a great act of destruction, but through 1,000 small acts of casual, thoughtless plunder. Historians still argue about the level of discipline in these armies. Some accounts praise certain commanders for maintaining strict order, while others paint a picture of utter anarchy. The truth is likely that it varied wildly depending on the commander, the circumstances, and how recently the men have been paid. For you, the academic debate is meaningless. The reality is a soldier using your family's only cooking pot as a latrine. The economic damage is devastating. The army's horses and oxen are turned loose in the common fields, devouring the spring crops. The grain that was stored in the village tithe barn, meant to feed everyone through the next season, is confiscated to feed the army's thousands. In a single day, the work of an entire year is undone. The army will move on tomorrow or the next day, leaving your village destitute with no food, damaged homes, and a future that looks bleaker than ever. They came as friends, but they have inflicted a wound as deep as any enemy could. This experience shatters any lingering notion you might have had about a good and bad side in this war. You realise there are no heroes, no noble causes. There are only the powerful, and there are the victims. The badges they wear, the white rose of York or the red rose of Lancaster, a symbol, by the way, that was largely a later Tudor invention to simplify the narrative, mean nothing. Underneath the livery they are all the same, a force of destruction that consumes everything in its path. You fought for them, you bled for them, and your reward is to watch them tear your life apart. As you lie on the cold floor in the corner of your own home, listening to the drunken snores of the soldiers who have taken your bed, you understand a new, profound truth of this war. Even when you win, you lose. The army finally moves on, leaving behind a silence that is more unnerving than the chaos it replaced. The immediate physical danger is gone, but in its wake, a slower, more insidious crisis begins to unfold. The complete collapse of your economic life. The war isn't just fought on battlefields, it's fought in the marketplaces, on the trade routes, and in the fields of every village like yours. The violence is a stone thrown into a pond, and the ripples of economic devastation spread far and wide, touching everything. You step outside your cottage and survey the damage. The village is a wreck, the fields are trampled, the communal grain stores are empty, and many of the livestock are gone. The delicate web of subsistence that sustained your community has been torn to shreds. Your family's immediate concern is simple and terrifying. What are we going to eat next week? The food the army didn't take is all you have, and you know it won't last. Destruction of capital, the disruption of trade, and the constant taxation created a multi-generational catastrophe for the lower classes. From your perspective, sitting in your plundered cottage and staring at your empty pantry, the debate is absurd. You are living the catastrophe. A quirky and telling detail of the economic strain can be seen in the church. Your parish priest announces that the church can no longer afford to maintain the candles on the side altars. Even more distressingly, the small charitable fund the church used to help the village's widows and orphans has run dry. The institution that was supposed to be the ultimate safety net has had its own financial legs cut out from under it. Even God's house is going broke. It's a powerful symbol of the complete breakdown of the social and economic order. You start to see your neighbours, people you've known your entire life, resorting to desperate measures. Thomas, the good man, is caught sneaking into the Lord's woods at night to trap a rabbit, an act of poaching that could get him whipped or branded. He does it because his children are crying from hunger. You see trust breaking down within the village itself. A missing tool is no longer assumed to be misplaced, it's assumed to be stolen. The communal bonds that held your village together are fraying under the immense strain of poverty and fear. You are trapped. You cannot work your land effectively, you cannot trade, and you are being taxed into oblivion. The war has become a monstrous engine that is consuming the wealth, security and hope of the entire kingdom. You lie awake at night listening to the sound of your own stomach rumbling, and you realise that the sword and the bill are not the only weapons in this war. Starvation, poverty and despair are just as deadly, and they are attacking you and your family every single day. The economic devastation is a slow, grinding pressure, but the political landscape provides a series of sharp, terrifying jolts. The entire concept of stability has vanished. The question of who rules England is no longer a settled fact, but a violent, seesawing debate that plays out in blood and betrayal. For you, a simple peasant, this isn't an abstract political drama. It's a deadly game of musical chairs where the loser might end up headless. Your survival depends on your ability to guess which song is playing and to whom you should be bending your knee this week. It begins not long after that first battle you survived. Your lord, a staunch Yorkist, was on the winning side. For a few months it seems settled. The Duke of York is the power behind the throne, the Lancastrians are scattered, and the King, Henry VI, is a docile puppet. The sermons in your church praise the wisdom and strength of the House of York. Your lord struts around the manor, confident and secure in his position. You are, by extension, on the right side. You used to supplement your family's diet and earn a few precious pennies by selling surplus eggs or vegetables at the weekly market in the local town. Now, that journey is too dangerous. The roads, which were never particularly safe, are now crawling with deserters, bandits, and scouts from both sides. To travel is to risk being robbed or killed for the handful of produce you're carrying. The market itself, you hear, is a shadow of its former self. Merchants are too afraid to transport their goods, so wares like salt, iron tools, and cloth have become scarce and incredibly expensive. The price of everything has skyrocketed, while your ability to earn anything has vanished. It's a vicious cycle of inflation and destitution. The mainstream historical fact of this period is the Great Slump, a severe and prolonged economic depression that afflicted England and much of northern Europe from the mid-15th century. The Wars of the Roses didn't cause this slump, but they exacerbated it in catastrophic ways. The war diverted wealth from productive investment into military expenditure. It disrupted agriculture, which was the backbone of the entire economy, and it shattered the confidence needed for trade and commerce to function. Your lord, the man who is supposed to be the steward of the local economy, is now its biggest problem. He is no longer focused on crop rotation or maintaining the manor's infrastructure. His entire focus is on raising money for his military campaigns. He imposes new, crippling taxes and levies on his tenants, demanding coin that you simply do not have. He might demand scutage, a payment made in lieu of military service, even though you have already been forced to serve. Or he might simply seize your last remaining pig or cow as a loan to the cause, a loan you know will never be repaid. The wool trade, which had been the engine of England's economy for generations, is hit particularly hard. You might have kept a few sheep, their wool sheared and sold to traders who would then sell it to weavers in the towns or export it to the great cloth-making cities of Flanders. It was a crucial source of cash for many peasant families. But now, the trade routes are broken. Large flocks of sheep are a tempting target for marauding soldiers, and merchants are unwilling to risk their capital on caravans that might never reach their destination. The price of wool plummets because there are no buyers. Your most valuable asset is suddenly worthless. The psychological effect of this collapse is profound. For generations, your family has lived by a predictable rhythm. You plant in the spring, you tend in the summer, you harvest in the autumn, you survive the winter. It was a hard life, but it had a certain logic to it. Now that logic is gone. Why bother planting a crop if an army is likely to march through and destroy it before it can be harvested? Why bother repairing your fence when it could be torn down for firewood next week? A creeping sense of futility takes hold, a feeling that any effort is pointless in the face of such overwhelming, unpredictable chaos. This hopelessness is as corrosive as any physical hardship. Historians still argue about the true long-term economic impact of the wars. Some suggest that because the fighting was intermittent and mostly confined to the nobility and their retainers, the effect on the everyday life of the common person was minimal. Others argue forcefully that the news trickles down again, carried by panicked messengers and grim-faced travellers. There has been another battle, this time at a place called Wakefield, and this time your side lost, and not just lost. They were annihilated. The Duke of York himself, the great white hope of his faction, was killed. The stories are gruesome. They say he was captured, mocked with a paper crown, and then beheaded. His head and that of his teenage son were then stuck on spikes above the gates of the city of York. This isn't just a defeat. It's a brutal, personal act of vengeance. Suddenly the world is turned upside down. Your lord, who was just weeks ago a powerful victor, is now a marked man on the losing side. He either flees into hiding or holds up in his manor, frantically sending messages to his allies. The political winds have changed with hurricane force, and you're caught in the gale. The priest, who was recently praising York, now conveniently omits any political references from his sermons, his face a mask of nervous neutrality. It's a laughable but understandable pivot. The real danger comes when the victorious Lancastrians arrive. The new lord, a man who was granted your old lord's lands by the triumphant Queen Margaret of Anjou, rides into the village. He's accompanied by his own thuggish retainers, who view you and everyone else as the former property of a traitor. You're now expected to instantly switch your allegiance. The white rose badges that were once a symbol of safety are now a death sentence. You hastily tear yours from your coat, praying no one remembers seeing you wear it. You are now a Lancastrian. You have no choice. You cheer for the new lord as he enters the manor, a cheer that feels like ash in your mouth. This becomes the rhythm of your life for the next decade. The mainstream historical fact is the sheer number of times the throne changed hands or power dramatically shifted. After Wakefield, the Yorkists seemed finished, but then York's brilliant and ruthless son, Edward, Earl of March, wins a string of victories. He crushes a Lancastrian army at Mortimer's Cross. He then rushes to London, where he is acclaimed as King Edward IV. A few weeks later, he fights the aforementioned apocalyptic battle at Towton, the one fought in a snowstorm, and utterly destroys the main Lancastrian force. King Henry VI and his queen flee to Scotland. So, you switch back. The Lancastrian lord is now the traitor, and he flees. Your old Yorkist lord, or perhaps his son if he was killed, returns. You're a Yorkist again. You sew the white rose back on. You try to look like you were a loyal Yorkist all along, that you were just pretending to support the other side under duress. Everyone in the village is engaged in the same desperate pantomime. You all tacitly agree not to mention the past few months. It's a collective, life-saving amnesia. This political whiplash is exhausting and terrifying. You live in constant fear of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. A careless word in the alehouse about the good old days under King Henry could be reported by a neighbour trying to curry favour with the new regime. The concept of treason becomes incredibly fluid. The mainstream historical fact is the use of acts of attainder by Parliament. When one side won, they would pass an act declaring all their main opponents to be traitors. This meant all their lands, titles and wealth were forfeit to the crown, which could then be redistributed to loyal supporters. It was the ultimate political weapon, turning rebellion into a high-stakes winner-take-all enterprise. Historians still argue about the degree to which these dynastic changes were understood or cared about at the village level. Was it just a change of landlord, or did people have genuine loyalties? For you, loyalty is a luxury you can't afford. Your only true loyalty is to your own survival. You learn to read the political winds, to listen carefully to rumours, to be a chameleon. It's a disgusting but necessary skill. A quirky and deeply cynical example of this is how you learn to greet strangers. You don't offer a hearty "God save King Henry" or "Long live King Edward" anymore. You use a vague, non-committal greeting. You talk about the weather. You wait for them to declare their allegiance first. It's a subtle, dangerous dance of words. The wrong guess could get you beaten or killed. This constant switching erodes any sense of legitimacy or respect for authority. The king is supposed to be God's anointed ruler, a sacred and unassailable figure. But you've had 3 different versions of who that is in the space of a year. The law is supposed to be constant, but you've seen it rewritten overnight to serve the victors. The Lord is supposed to be your protector, but you've seen him run for his life, just as scared as you are. The entire edifice of the medieval world, built on a foundation of stable, hierarchical authority, is crumbling before your eyes. You feel unmoored, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. You go to bed one night a subject of King Henry, a Lancastrian. You wake up the next morning and thanks to a battle fought 100 miles away by men you've never met, you are now a subject of King Edward, a Yorkist. Your identity, your legal standing, and your personal safety are all subject to change without notice. It's a life of constant, anxious whiplash, and the only thing you know for sure is that the next reversal could be just around the corner. While you, as a man, are forced to navigate the horrors of the battlefield and the treacherous currents of political allegiance, the women of your world face their own unique and devastating set of challenges. Their war is not one of sharp, sudden violence, but a slow, grinding siege against their security, their bodies and their families. For your wife, your mother, your sisters and your daughters, the chaos of the wars brings a special kind of brutal reality. When you are conscripted and marched away, the entire burden of survival falls upon your wife's shoulders. She becomes, in effect, the head of the household, a role for which society has not prepared her and for which the law gives her little authority. She must tend the garden, care for the remaining livestock and look after the children, all while consumed with a gnawing anxiety for your safety. Every passing traveller is a potential source of news, and every rumour of a battle is a fresh wave of terror. She lives in a state of suspended grief, not knowing if she is a wife or a widow. Her legal status is incredibly precarious. A mainstream historical fact is that under the system of coverture, a married woman's legal identity was subsumed by that of her husband. She could not own property in her own name, sign a contract or sue or be sued. She was, in the eyes of the law, an extension of you. When you vanish into the fog of war, she's left in a legal limbo. She cannot sell a pig to buy grain or lease a small parcel of land to a neighbour, because technically it is not hers to sell or lease. She is the acting manager of a life to which she holds no official title. The most immediate and constant threat is from the men who remain. When an army, friendly or otherwise, passes through the village, as you witnessed, women are the primary targets of a specific kind of violence. Remember the fear you felt for your own wife and children. That fear becomes her daily reality. The absence of husbands, fathers and brothers leaves the women of the village dangerously exposed. She learns to make herself invisible, to bar the door, to hide her daughters. A trip to the well for water becomes a calculated risk. The psychological toll of this constant vigilance, this need to be on guard against the men who are supposed to be their protectors, is immense. If you do not return, her situation becomes even more dire. As a widow, she might be entitled to a dower, typically 1/3 of her husband's land, for the remainder of her life. But enforcing this right in a time of chaos is nearly impossible. If your land was held from a lord who was on the losing side, all his grants are now void. A new lord may not recognise her claim. She could be evicted from her home, the cottage you shared, with her children in tow, and left with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her best hope for security is to remarry quickly, but finding a suitable husband in a land depleted of its young men is a challenge in itself. She might be forced to marry a man she despises simply to have a roof over her children's heads. For the women of the nobility, the stakes are different, but no less brutal. A high-born lady's life is a political commodity. Her marriage is not a matter of love, but a strategic alliance, a way of sealing a pact between two powerful families. In the turmoil of the wars, these alliances are made and broken with dizzying speed. A young noblewoman might be betrothed to a Yorkist heir one year, only to find him dead or attainted for treason the next. Her father might then quickly marry her off to a prominent Lancastrian to secure his own position in the new political climate. She is a pawn in her father's game, her personal happiness entirely irrelevant. Historians still argue about the agency of these elite women. Figures like Margaret of Anjou, King Henry's formidable queen, commanded armies and were ruthless political players in their own right. But was she the exception, or a symbol of the power that other noble women could wield? For every Margaret of Anjou, there were hundreds of lesser noble women like Repaston, women whose letters reveal lives of constant anxiety about sieges, lawsuits, and the violent whims of their male relatives. They were managers of castles and estates in their husband's absence, but their authority was constantly challenged. A quirky and sad tidbit of the female experience is the concept of the vowess. A widow, particularly a wealthy one, could take a public vow of chastity, promising never to remarry. This was sometimes a genuinely pious act, but it was also a clever legal manoeuvre. By becoming a vowess, she placed herself under the protection of the church and gained a degree of independence that was otherwise impossible. She could control her own property without the interference of a new husband or male guardian. It was a rare loophole that allowed a woman to become the master of her own fate, but at the cost of foregoing any future companionship. For your wife, back in the village, there are no such clever options. Her life is a relentless series of hard choices. Does she use the last of the grain to make bread for the children, or save it as seed for a spring planting that may never happen? When a soldier demands the family's only blanket, does she refuse and risk a beating, or give it up and watch her children shiver through the night? These are the impossible decisions that the war forces upon her. She watches her children grow up in a world of fear and scarcity. They are malnourished, their growth stunted. Their games are not of knights and ladies, but of battles and sieges. They learn to identify the badges of York and Lancaster before they learn to read. She must try to preserve some semblance of normalcy, of childhood, in a world gone mad. It is an exhausting, emotionally draining, and often thankless task. The brutality of the Wars of the Roses wasn't just measured in the number of men killed in battle, it was measured in the silent suffering of the women left behind. It was in the fear in a wife's eyes as soldiers approached, the hunger in a child's belly, and the crushing weight of responsibility on a woman left to face the chaos alone. Her scars might not be visible, but they are just as deep and just as painful as any wound received on the battlefield. The political whiplash is dizzying, a constant threat from the world of great men and their grand ambitions. But as the seasons turn, that high-level danger is eclipsed by a much more fundamental and agonising problem, the gnawing, relentless pain of hunger. The armies, with their insatiable appetites and casual destruction, have moved on, but they left behind a famine in their wake. Your world, once governed by the rhythm of planting and harvest, is now governed by the dull, hollow ache in your belly. The disruption of supply lines is the other blade of the scissors. In peaceful times, if your local harvest failed, grain could be brought in from other, more fortunate regions. Now the roads are impassable, choked with bandits and soldiers. No merchant will risk a wagon load of precious food on a road where it's certain to be stolen. The normal commerce that balanced out regional food shortages has completely broken down. Your village has become an island, and the island is running out of food. This constant hunger changes you. It shortens your temper and clouds your judgment. It erodes the bonds of community. You start to look at your neighbours with suspicion. Did the blacksmith manage to hide a sack of grain? Is the reeve keeping a private stash for himself? You see a neighbour hastily cover something in his garden, and your first thought isn't curiosity, but a flash of resentful envy. The communal spirit that once defined village life, the sharing of tools and labour evaporates. Every man, every family is now in a desperate struggle for itself. You grow weaker. The physical labour of trying to coax life from the dead fields becomes impossible. Your world shrinks. Your only thoughts are of food. You dream of it. You hallucinate the smell of roasting meat. You are being erased, slowly and painfully, not by a sword, but by a simple lack of bread. You realise that for the great lords and aspiring kings, your starvation is, at best, a regrettable consequence, and at worst, a useful tool. You are not a person to them. You are a resource to be denied to their enemy. And as you lie awake, listening to the hollow sound of your own stomach, you understand that this war has many ways of killing you, and this is the slowest and cruelest of them all. The gnawing hunger has weakened your body, scraped away your reserves of strength, and left you vulnerable. And now, into this world of malnourishment and despair, comes the inevitable companion of war and famine, disease. The great armies that march across the landscape are not just carriers of swords and banners, they are mobile vectors of sickness, concentrating and then spreading pestilence wherever they go. The filth of their camps, the contamination of water sources, and the sheer number of unburied dead create a perfect breeding ground for epidemics that sweep through the civilian population with terrifying speed. It begins subtly. A child in the village develops a fever and a cough. A few days later, another. Then an old woman is struck down with a violent stomach ailment. In normal times, these might be isolated incidents. But your community is a tinderbox of weakened immune systems, and it starts as a quiet emptiness, a void where the morning pottage used to be. The grain stores, as you remember, were emptied by the soldiers. The small sack of flour your wife hid under a loose floorboard is gone, used up crumb by crumb to make thin, unsatisfying bread that felt more like a memory of food than a meal itself. Now there is nothing. The silence in your cottage is different now. It's not the silence of peace, but the lethargic silence of malnutrition. Your children don't have the energy to play. They sit listlessly, their cries for food having faded into a heartbreaking, quiet despair. This makes your own gnawing hunger feel like a trivial inconvenience, like wanting a snack after seeing a food commercial. You look out at the fields. The neat strips of land that once promised a harvest are a disaster zone. The spring planting was trampled by the army's march, and now weeds are the only thing growing with any enthusiasm. There will be no harvest this autumn. The very source of your existence has been poisoned. The war didn't just kill men, it killed the land itself. So, you become a forager, a hunter-gatherer in your own backyard. You spend your days scouring the woods and hedgerows for anything edible. You gather nettles to be boiled into a bitter green sludge. You dig for pig nuts and other tough, starchy roots. You learn, through painful trial and error, which berries will just make you sick and which are safe to eat. It's a crash course in what part of this suspiciously vibrant mushroom won't kill me. You collect acorns, a food you once thought fit only for pigs, and spend hours boiling them multiple times to leach out the bitter tannins, leaving you with a gritty, unappetizing paste. This is where you learn to make famine bread. There's not enough wheat or rye flour, so you learn to extend it. You mix what little flour you have with sawdust, tree bark, dried and powdered peas, or the chaff that was once discarded. You bake a loaf that is heavy, dark, and hard as a rock. 5-star reviews would mention its robust texture and earthy notes, which is a polite way of saying it tastes like dirt and could be used to patch a wall. But it fills the stomach for a little while, and it comes with its own dangers. Rye, a common crop for the poor, can become infected with a fungus called ergot, especially when harvested in damp conditions and stored improperly. Eating bread made from this contaminated rye leads to a horrifying condition called ergotism, or St Anthony's fire, which caused hallucinations, seizures, and a burning gangrene that would blacken and kill the limbs. A mainstream historical fact is that armies of this period actively used starvation as a weapon. This wasn't just the accidental result of their passing through, it was often a deliberate strategy. The commander would order his troops to systematically destroy the enemy's resources in a scorched earth policy. You see the evidence of this in the distance. A plume of smoke on the horizon isn't a signal of a battle, it's a Lancastrian force burning a Yorkist lord's barns and slaughtering his tenants' livestock, ensuring that the region cannot support an enemy army. The next week, a Yorkist force might do the same thing 10 miles in the other direction. Historians still argue whether these scorched earth tactics were a calculated top-down strategy to break civilian morale, or simply the undisciplined, chaotic result of hungry armies taking what they needed. To you, the distinction is academic. Your children are starving either way. Spark of disease now finds ample fuel. What was once a simple sickness now spreads like wildfire. The most common and feared visitor is dysentery, known as the bloody flux. You've seen it in the army camps, and now it has followed you home. The armies contaminate the streams and wells with their waste, and the bacteria flourish. It starts with stomach cramps and a fever, that quickly progresses to a debilitating and dehydrating diarrhea stained with blood. In a world without IV drips or rehydration salts, it's often a death sentence, especially for the very young and the very old. You watch in helpless terror as your youngest child, already thin from hunger, is racked with the illness. Your wife tries to spoon weak broth and water into their mouth, but it's a losing battle. The vibrant life you cherished is fading before your eyes, and there is nothing you can do. Then there are the fevers. Sweating sickness is a new and particularly terrifying disease that appears in this era. A mainstream historical fact is that this illness was notorious for its rapid and deadly course. A person could be healthy in the morning, develop a high fever, profuse sweating and severe pains, and be dead by nightfall. Its cause is still a mystery to modern science, possibly a type of hantavirus, but to you, it feels like a divine punishment, a swift and merciless judgment. When it appears in a village, it causes a panic unlike any other. People bar their doors, refusing to help their neighbours for fear of catching the sickness. The bonds of community, already frayed by hunger, are completely severed by the terror of contagion. The more familiar plagues are ever present. Typhus, spread by the lice that infest your clothes and bedding, flourishes in the crowded, unsanitary conditions of a population displaced or impoverished by war. You scratch at the constant itch of the lice, knowing that these tiny creatures could be carrying your death warrant. Smallpox, measles, and influenza, diseases that are now largely preventable or treatable, are ferocious killers, leaving survivors scarred and weakened if they survive at all. Medical care is non-existent. The village has no doctor. Your only source of healing is perhaps an elderly woman who knows some herbal remedies, or the parish priest who can offer prayers and last rites. The remedies are a mixture of folk wisdom and superstition. You might be told to tie a bag of foul-smelling herbs around your neck to ward off the miasma, the bad air believed to carry disease, or you might be bled by a barber surgeon, a terrifying procedure where a vein is opened to drain the excess humours that are thought to be causing the illness. This, of course, only weakens the patient further, hastening their demise. Historians still argue about the demographic impact of disease during the Wars of the Roses. Unlike the well-documented Black Death of the previous century, the death tolls from these wartime epidemics are harder to quantify. Were they localised outbreaks, or did they cause a significant nationwide population decline? While the exact numbers are debated, the personal accounts and chronicles of the time are filled with references to pestilence following in the wake of armies, suggesting that the impact was both widespread and devastating. A quirky and grim tidbit from the period is the rise of the plague doctor figure. Though this is more iconic of the 17th century, its roots are in this medieval understanding of disease. You might see a travelling physician pass through, wearing a strange mask with a long beak. This beak would be stuffed with aromatic herbs like lavender and mint, based on the belief that it would filter out the poisonous miasma. He is a terrifying figure, his appearance heralding the presence of the plague. He offers useless, expensive cures, and then quickly moves on before the townspeople realise he's a charlatan. He's a vulture of a different sort, preying not on the dead, but on the dying's desperation. The psychological toll of living through an epidemic is crushing. The constant fear of an invisible enemy is, in some ways, worse than the fear of a visible one. You can't fight a fever with a billhook. You start to see death not as a distant eventuality, but as a constant hovering presence. Every cough, every sneeze from a family member sends a jolt of pure terror through you. The church bell, which once marked the hours of the day, now seems to toll constantly, marking another death, another neighbour gone. You feel utterly powerless. You have survived battle, you have endured hunger, but now you are fighting an enemy you cannot see, an enemy that can slip through your door unseen and steal your loved ones from their beds. The world feels cursed, abandoned by God. You walk through the village, and the silence is punctuated by the sounds of weeping from behind closed doors. The war has unleashed many forms of brutality, but this, the silent, inexorable creep of disease through your weakened and starving community, feels like the most cruel and personal blow of all. It steals your future, your family, your hope, leaving you in a desolate world haunted by the ghosts of those you could not save. You have been through a gauntlet of horrors. You have seen men butchered in battle, watched your home be plundered, felt the gnawing ache of starvation, and held the feverish hand of a dying child. Each fresh wave of suffering has chipped away at the foundations of your world. But the final and perhaps most profound casualty of this endless war is your faith. The simple, unquestioning belief that once structured your life, offering comfort and meaning, has begun to crumble into dust. For your entire life, the church has been the unshakable centre of your universe. The stone building itself was the most permanent and impressive thing you knew. The priest was God's representative on earth, his words the literal truth. The rhythm of the liturgical year, with its fasts and feast days, was the rhythm of your own life. You believed in a just and merciful God who watched over his flock. You believed that suffering in this life would be rewarded in the next. You believed that prayer had power. Now, you are not so sure. You sit in the cold church on Sunday listening to the priest's sermon. He speaks of God's divine plan, of the trials sent to test the faithful, but his words sound hollow, empty platitudes that cannot begin to address the scale of the suffering you have witnessed. Where was God's divine plan when the blacksmith who saved your life was cut down in the next battle? Where was his mercy when the flocks took your neighbour's infant daughter? You look at the crucifix above the altar, the image of Christ's suffering, which was once a symbol of redemptive sacrifice. Now, it just looks like more pain in a world already overflowing with it. You begin to question the role of the church itself. You see the parish priest, a man sworn to poverty, enjoying a slightly better diet than his starving parishioners. You hear whispers of the great bishops and abbots, who are some of the wealthiest landowners in the kingdom. They are princes of the church, living in palaces, and they are just as enmeshed in the bloody politics of the war as any secular lord. A mainstream historical fact is that many high-ranking churchmen were active political players. Men like Bishop Neville were key supporters of the Yorkist cause, raising armies and plotting strategy. They wore armour under their robes and behaved more like warlords than shepherds. How can they be men of God when their hands are stained with the same blood as the nobles? This hypocrisy corrodes your respect. You remember being taught that usury, lending money at interest, was a mortal sin. Yet you know that the church is one of the biggest lenders, growing rich on the debts of others. You are told to be humble and obedient, yet the Pope and his cardinals engage in power struggles that rival those of any king. The institution that claims a monopoly on salvation seems to be just as greedy, violent and fallible as any other human enterprise. Historians still argue about the depth of Lollardy and other heretical movements during this period. The Lollards, followers of the reformer John Wycliffe, had been brutally suppressed a generation earlier, but their ideas lingered. They believed the church was corrupt, that the Bible should be in English, not Latin, and that the individual's relationship with God did not require the intercession of a priest. You may not be a Lollard, the name itself is a whispered insult, but you find yourself sympathising with some of their criticisms. When the priest mumbles the Latin Mass, a language you do not understand, it no longer feels like a holy mystery. It feels like a deliberate exclusion, a way of keeping knowledge and power for the clerical elite. This crisis of faith is deeply personal and isolating. You cannot voice your doubts. To do so would be to risk an accusation of heresy, a crime that could get you ostracised or even burned at the stake. So you keep your questions locked inside, a corrosive secret that eats away at your soul. You go through the motions, attending Mass, saying the prayers, but the feeling is gone. It is a performance of faith, not the substance of it. You look for signs of God's presence and see only his absence. You pray for rain for your withered crops, and the sky remains a merciless, empty blue. You pray for an end to the war, and you hear rumours of another army being raised. A quirky, yet telling, sign of this spiritual malaise is the decline in pilgrims. The great shrines, like the one at Walsingham or Canterbury, were once thronged with people seeking miracles and salvation, but now, with the roads unsafe and people's savings gone, the pilgrim routes are quiet. It seems that even the business of miracles is in a slump. You find yourself turning away from the official church and towards older, more primal beliefs. Superstition flourishes in the vacuum left by faith. You might pay a precious coin for a cheap tin charm that a travelling pardoner claims as a relic, a splinter from the true cross, or a thread from the Virgin Mary's cloak. You don't really believe it, but you're desperate enough to try anything. You find yourself paying more attention to folk magic, to the cunning woman on the edge of the village who offers herbal cures and protective charms. You put a hagstone with a hole in it over your door, not just as a tradition, but with a desperate hope that it might actually work. If the Christian God has abandoned you, perhaps these older, earthier powers can offer some protection. This spiritual erosion is the ultimate form of brutality the war has inflicted. It has not just destroyed your body, your home, and your livelihood. It has destroyed your understanding of the cosmos. It has taken away the narrative that gave your suffering meaning. You're no longer a soul enduring an earthly trial on the path to heavenly reward. You're just a creature of flesh and blood, living in a world of random, senseless violence, ruled by cruel and selfish men. There is no divine plan. There is only the chaos of the here and now. You're adrift in a meaningless universe, and that is the most terrifying realization of all. The crisis of faith you feel is a cold, hollow space inside you. The world, once ordered by a divine plan, now seems a chaotic and cruel joke. And just as you think you understand the senselessness of it all, the ambition of great lords, the weakness of a king, you discover a new, even more pathetic layer to the tragedy. You learn that the grand, sweeping conflict between York and Lancaster, the war that has torn your life apart, is often just a flimsy excuse for something far more mundane, a neighbourhood dispute with swords. It starts with a new kind of fear. The dread of a vast army on the march is a familiar terror, but this is different. This is the fear of your immediate neighbour. You begin to hear of trouble not from 100 miles away, but from the next valley over. A shepherd is found beaten, a small mill is burned to the ground. These aren't the acts of a great army. They are smaller, more intimate acts of violence, delivered with a personal malice. The retainers you see patrolling the edges of your lord's land aren't looking for a Lancastrian army. They are looking for men wearing the badge of Lord Fitzherbert, whose lands begin just over the ridge. You learn the story in hushed tones at the alehouse, from the grumbling of the reeve. Your lord and Lord Fitzherbert hate each other. They have always hated each other. Their grandfathers fought over a disputed forest boundary. Their fathers argued over a marriage dowry. A few years ago, your lord was given a place of honour at a feast that Fitzherbert thought should have been his. It's a feud that has been simmering for generations, a cancer of pride and resentment passed down from father to son. It's like the worst homeowners association squabble in history. Instead of passive-aggressive notes, they use arson and murder. Before, these feuds were kept somewhat in check by the authority of the king. But now, with the kingdom split in two, these local rivalries have found a bigger flag to hide behind. Your lord, a staunch Yorkist, has declared Lord Fitzherbert a treacherous Lancastrian rebel, and Fitzherbert naturally has declared your lord a Yorkist usurper. The great national struggle has given them a licence to pursue their petty personal vendetta with renewed ferocity. They don't actually care about the succession crisis. They just want to ruin each other, and have found a convenient, sanctimonious excuse to do so. Historians still argue whether the Wars of the Roses was truly a national dynastic conflict, or merely a collection of pre-existing local feuds that coalesced under the convenient banners of York and Lancaster. Looking at the smoke rising from a barn on Fitzherbert's land, you feel you know the answer. The War of Kings is distant. The War of Neighbours is right here, and it is vicious. This was, in fact, terrifyingly common. A mainstream historical fact is that the most famous and destructive of these private wars was the one between the Percy and Neville families in the north of England. The Percys had long been the dominant power in the region, but the Nevilles were ambitious, powerful, and on the rise. Their rivalry escalated throughout the 1450s into open warfare. with battles involving thousands of men. When the national conflict erupted, the Percys sided with Lancaster and the Nevilles with York, turning the north of England into their personal playground for destruction. The dynastic war didn't start their feud, but it poured fuel on its already raging fire. You see a small-scale version of this play out before your eyes. One day a dozen of your lord's retainers ride out. They don't march, they ride fast and hard. They return a few hours later, driving a stolen flock of sheep and laughing about the skirmish they had with Fitzherbert's men. 2 of them are wounded and 1 is missing. He's not a casualty of the Wars of the Roses. He did not die for King Edward. He died because 2 arrogant nobles couldn't get along. The whole brutal affair is wrapped in a bizarre, almost comical layer of chivalric pretension. You hear a story from one of the Lord's squires that before launching a major raid on Fitzherbert's main manor, your lord sent him a formal written challenge. This quirky tidbit reveals the incredible cognitive dissonance of the nobility. The letter, written by a hired scribe in flowery language, apparently accused Fitzherbert of treason and dishonour, detailed the long list of offences his family had committed, and then politely informed him of the date and time your lord intended to arrive to burn his property and kill his men. It's the medieval equivalent of sending a calligraph to save the date for your own violent home invasion. This knowledge makes the suffering even more galling. Your faith in God is gone, and now your faith in any sort of noble cause is shattered too. Your life has been ruined, your friends killed, your family starved, not for a kingdom or a principle, but for a property line dispute from 50 years ago. The men dying in these skirmishes are not martyrs. They are collateral damage in a glorified pissing contest between 2 men with egos as fragile as spun glass. The war is no longer a singular, coherent event in your mind. It is a fractal of violence, where the Great War is replicated in miniature in every county, every valley. The King's War, the Lord's War, the Neighbour's War, is all the same senseless destruction, driven by the same human failings of pride, greed and spite. You feel a profound contempt for the men in their shining armour, playing their deadly games while you and your family are left to sweep up the bloody pieces. The world is not just chaotic, it is pathetically, tragically, petty. And you are living, and likely dying, in the wreckage of that pettiness. The petty wars of local lords and the grand campaigns of kings have one terrifying tactic in common. A method of warfare that bypasses the battlefield entirely and turns your own home into a prison. The siege. One day the enemy you've been fighting in skirmishes, Lord Fitzherbert's Lancastrian forces in your case, arrives in overwhelming numbers, but they don't offer battle. Instead, they surround your lord's castle and the town that huddles around its walls. You, having sought refuge inside the town's fortifications at the first sign of trouble, are now trapped. The gates are barred, the walls are manned, and a slow, grinding horror begins. At first, there's a sense of defiant optimism. The walls are thick, the castle is strong, and your lord has assured everyone that a relieving Yorkist army is on its way. The soldiers on the ramparts shout insults at the besiegers below, a display of bravado that feels reassuring. But as days turn into weeks, the bravado fades, replaced by a grim, monotonous reality. The world shrinks to the confines of the castle and town walls. The horizon, which once represented possibility, is now just a line you cannot cross, a line patrolled by enemy soldiers. Surrender. But for those caught inside, like the defenders of Harlech Castle who held out for the Lancastrian cause for 7 long years, the experience was a slow-motion nightmare. The social order begins to break down. The lord and his knights, protected at the central keep, eat better than you do. You see their relative health and feel a burning resentment. Why should their lives be more valuable than your children's? Fights break out over a dropped piece of bread. The law of the castle is the law of the sword, and ordinary people like you are at the bottom of the food chain. Finally, the inevitable happens. The relieving army doesn't arrive. The food is gone. The walls are breached. The defenders are too weak from hunger and disease to fight effectively. The lord has a choice: surrender and hope for mercy, or fight to the last and face a certain massacre when the walls fall. He chooses to surrender. A parley is held. The gates are opened. The moment the enemy army enters is one of profound terror and humiliation. You are at their complete mercy. Sometimes, the terms of surrender are honoured and the population is spared. Other times, the victorious soldiers, enraged by the long siege, run riot, looting, burning and killing. You can only huddle with your family, praying you will be overlooked. You have endured months of slow, grinding horror, only to be faced with a final, explosive moment of violence. You have survived the siege, but you are left with nothing but the traumatic memories of a time when your entire world was a cage, and death was the only thing trying to get in. You have survived the siege, but walking out of the broken gates is not a return to freedom. It is merely an exchange of one prison for another, much larger one. The castle walls, which had been your cage, were also your shield. Now, you're exposed to the vast, lawless landscape that England has become. The very concept of safe travel has ceased to exist. Every road, every forest path, every river crossing is now a place of potential danger, controlled not by the king's law, but by the whim of desperate and violent men. Your village, plundered and starved before the siege, is now a ghost of its former self. Many cottages are empty, their occupants dead from the siege or having fled. The fields are overgrown with thorns. There is no community, no support, just a collection of traumatised survivors trying to scratch a living from the ruins. The need to travel, therefore, becomes more urgent than ever. You might need to journey to a nearby town that was spared the worst of the fighting, hoping to find work, to buy seed grain, or to seek out relatives who might be able to help. The first casualty is the food supply. A castle can be well stocked, but it has to provide for its garrison and the entire population of the town that has crammed inside its walls for protection. The rations are cut immediately. Your daily portion of bread shrinks. The watery pottage becomes even more watery. Meat disappears entirely, reserved for the fighting men. You're in a race against starvation, and you can see the finish line approaching with dreadful certainty. The sights and sounds of the siege are relentless. During the day, there is the constant threat of attack. The enemy might try to scale the walls with ladders, or wheel a massive siege tower, a belfry, into position. The air is filled with the roar of their siege engines. A mainstream historical fact is the increasing use of gunpowder artillery in this period. Great cannons, with names like bombard, hurl massive stone or iron balls at the walls. Each impact is a deafening explosion that shakes the very ground, sending tremors of fear through the huddled population. You watch as a section of the wall crumbles under the barrage, and a desperate scramble of men-at-arms rushes to build a makeshift barricade in the breach. The nights offer no respite. The enemy keeps you off balance with night raids and constant noise, shouting and beating drums to rob the defenders of sleep. The psychological pressure is immense. You live in a state of constant heightened alert, your nerves frayed to the breaking point. The lack of sleep, combined with the lack of food, turns people into gaunt, hollow-eyed spectres. As the siege drags on, the conditions inside the walls deteriorate rapidly. The town becomes a giant open-air prison. With thousands of people crammed into a small space, sanitation breaks down completely. The wells become contaminated. Disease, the loyal camp follower of both famine and war, begins its silent, deadly work. Dysentery and typhus sweep through the enclosed population. You watch your neighbours sicken and die, their bodies hastily buried in any available patch of earth. The cramped space becomes a tomb. You see human nature devolve to its most desperate state. People hoard scraps of food. A dead horse, killed by a cannonball, is stripped of its meat in minutes by a ravenous crowd. Rumours of cannibalism begin to circulate, whispered tales of people disappearing in the night. You don't know if they are true, but in the depths of your own hunger, you can almost understand the horrifying logic. A quirky and disgusting aspect of siege warfare is the use of biological and chemical attacks, medieval style. The siegers would use their trebuchets not just to hurl stones, but to launch rotting animal carcasses and other filth over the walls. The goal was not just to spread disease, but to demoralise the defenders with an unbearable stench, and the horror of it all. You might see the bloated corpse of a cow sail over the wall and explode in a cloud of putrescence in the middle of a street. It is a form of warfare designed to break the mind as much as the body. Historians still argue about the frequency of full-blown, prolonged sieges during the Wars of the Roses compared to earlier conflicts. Some suggest that the mobile nature of the campaigns meant many sieges were short-lived, ended by the approach of a relieving army, or a quick outlaws, but your experience suggests the latter. The bandits you fear are not making a political statement. They are trying to steal your shoes and the bread in your pouch. They are just as likely to rob a poor peasant as a wealthy merchant, because a peasant is an easier target. The journey is agonisingly slow. A trip that might have taken 2 days in peaceful times now takes a week of cautious sneaking and hiding. You learn to read the landscape for signs of danger. A flock of crows circling in the distance might mean a dead body, a sign of recent violence. The absence of birds or animals in a stretch of woods might mean other humans are nearby. You become attuned to the subtle language of fear. Even if you reach your destination, your troubles are not over. The town itself is a fortress of suspicion. The gates may be closed to outsiders, or you may be subject to intense questioning by the town guard. In a world where everyone is a potential enemy, a stranger is a threat. You, a gaunt figure in rags, are viewed with deep mistrust. Are you a spy? A deserter? Are you carrying disease? You might finally find your relatives, only to discover that they are in a situation as dire as your own. There is no spare food, no work, no comfort to be had. Your perilous journey has been for nothing. You're faced with the prospect of an equally dangerous return trip. The roads, you realise, are the arteries of the kingdom, and they are clogged and bleeding. The inability to move, to trade, to connect is strangling the life out of the country. You're a prisoner of your own geography, trapped in a small blighted patch of a broken kingdom, where the simple act of walking down a road has become a gamble with your life. Your journey through the bandit-ridden landscape has taught you to fear your own countrymen, the deserters, the outlaws, the retainers of feuding lords. But as the war grinds on, a new and even more unsettling figure appears on the English stage, the foreign mercenary. Desperate for experienced soldiers and unwilling to rely solely on unreliable feudal levies, both the Yorkist and Lancastrian factions begin to hire professional soldiers from the continent. These men are not fighting for a cause, for a lord, or for a home. They are fighting for one thing only, cash, and their presence adds a new and terrifying dimension to the suffering of the common people. You first encounter them as a rumour. A traveller in a town alehouse speaks of the Queen, Margaret of Anjou, landing in the north with an army of Scots. Another tells of the new King Edward IV hiring companies of Burgundian and Flemish crossbowmen and handgunners to bolster his forces. These stories are told with a particular kind of dread. The Scots are ancient. Preparing for such a journey is a grim affair. You have nothing of value to steal, which is both a blessing and a curse. You travel light, carrying only a small pouch with a crust of bread and perhaps a sharpened stick for defence, a pathetic weapon against the dangers you might face. You dress in your most ragged clothes, trying to look as poor and unassuming as possible. The goal is not to impress, but to be utterly unnoticeable, to be not worth the effort of robbing. As you set out on the road, the decay of the kingdom is immediately apparent. The King's Highway, once a thoroughfare of commerce, is now a desolate track. You see the ruins of a merchant's cart, burned and looted, its contents scattered in the mud. You pass by a gibbet at a crossroads, where the blackened, skeletal remains of a hanged man swing in the wind, a grim warning from an authority that no longer has the power to enforce its own justice. The greatest danger comes from the human predators that now infest the countryside. The first group you must fear are the deserters. After every major battle or disbanded campaign, thousands of soldiers who were conscripted just like you simply melt away. They are far from home, with no money, no food, and no trade other than the violence they have just learned. They roam the countryside in small, dangerous gangs, taking what they need to survive. They are the war's brutal cast-offs, and they are utterly ruthless. Then there are the career bandits, the opportunistic outlaws who have always existed on the fringes of society, but who now flourish in the power vacuum. A mainstream historical fact is that the breakdown of royal authority led to a massive spike in general lawlessness. The local gentry, who were supposed to act as sheriffs and justices of the peace, were too busy fighting their own private wars to police the roads. Gangs like the Feudals of an earlier generation become the model for organised crime, sometimes led by rogue knights, or disgruntled squires who use their military training for plunder. You learn to travel with extreme caution. You don't walk on the main road, but stick to the woods alongside it, moving from tree to tree like a hunted animal. Every approaching sound, the snap of a twig, the nicker of a horse, sends a jolt of adrenaline through you. You see a group of armed men in the distance and quickly throw yourself into a ditch, lying motionless and praying they don't see you. You spend the nights not in inns, which are often dangerous dens for thieves anyway, but sleeping in cold, hidden places, a hollow log, a thicket of thorns, the ruins of an abandoned chapel. A quirky yet practical piece of traveller's lore you might pick up is to always carry a false purse. This would be a small pouch containing a few worthless, low-value coins. If you're cornered by robbers, you can throw it to them and run in the opposite direction. While they are distracted by the meagre prize, you might have a chance to escape. It's a sad commentary on the times when your best survival strategy is to plan on being robbed. Historians still argue about the true character of these outlaws. Were they proto-revolutionaries like the mythical Robin Hood, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, or were they just vicious thugs preying on anyone weaker than themselves? The ballads might sing of noble. Feuding nobles now feels like an invasion. You hear stories, likely exaggerated but rooted in truth, of the mercenaries' cruelty. Tales of them burning churches, something even English soldiers were often reluctant to do, of them torturing peasants to find hidden valuables, and of their general disregard for any of the supposed rules of war. A quirky but terrifying example of their alien nature is their food. You might see them eating strange pungent sausages or dark hard breads they brought with them. More disturbingly, they might catch and eat things you would never consider food, like frogs or squirrels, which they cook over their fires. This small culinary difference marks them as utterly other, reinforcing the idea that they are not civilized men, but savage outsiders who have been unleashed upon your land. The lords who hire them seem to have a love-hate relationship with their foreign employees. They need their military expertise, but they also know how dangerous and unpopular they are. Often, as soon as a campaign is over, the lords are desperate to get the mercenaries out of the country before they cause even more trouble, but paying them off and shipping them out is expensive, and sometimes they linger, becoming little more than well-armed bandit gangs. For you, these men represent the final degradation of the conflict. The war is no longer an English family squabble. It has become an international free-for-all, a business transaction where your life and property are part of the payment. The sight of a foreign mercenary on an English road is a potent symbol of how broken your kingdom has become. The ruling class, in their desperation to win their private wars, have willingly invited wolves into the sheepfold, and you are the sheep. Years have passed. The political seesaw has continued its violent swings. King Edward IV, the charismatic Yorkist son, has ruled, been deposed, fled into exile, and then returned to reclaim his throne in a stunningly successful campaign. You've weathered it all, developing a cynical, hardened shell of adaptability. You've learned to keep your head down, to feign loyalty to whoever holds power, and to expect nothing but hardship. You think you have seen the worst the war can offer. Then, a new name begins to dominate the whispers and rumours, a name that brings with it a different kind of chill. Richard. He is the Duke of Gloucester, King Edward IV's youngest brother. Throughout Edward's reign, you've known of him as loyal and ruthlessly effective commander, the king's most steadfast supporter. He governed the notoriously difficult north of England with an iron fist, keeping the Scots and the feuding nobles in line. His reputation is one of stark competence, piety, and of enemies known for their brutal border raids. The Burgundians are reputed to be the finest and most ruthless soldiers in Europe. They are professionals in the art of war, and they view England not as a home to be defended, but as a workplace to be plundered. One day you see them for yourself. A contingent of them marches through your area, part of a larger army being assembled by your Yorkist lord. They are immediately visibly different. They are not the motley collection of conscripted peasants you marched with. They are hard-faced men who move with a chilling efficiency. Their equipment is superior, gleaming steel helmets, thick brigandine jackets, and a fearsome array of professional weapons like pikes, halberds, and the strange noisy hand-guns that belch smoke and fire. They speak in languages you don't understand, their words sharp and guttural, which only adds to their alien and menacing aura. They have no connection to the land and no stake in its future. To them, your village is not a community of souls. It is a resource to be exploited. Their behaviour is even worse than that of the English soldiers you've endured. While an English retainer might be restrained by a sliver of common identity or fear of punishment from his lord, the mercenaries feel no such constraints. Their loyalty is to their paymaster and their captain, and as long as they are paid, they are allowed to do whatever they please to the local populace. They take what they want with a brutal, unapologetic directness. They don't just borrow your cooking pot, they kick in your door, put a knife to your throat and take it. They don't just steal a chicken, they slaughter your entire flock for a single night's feast. The casual violence you witnessed from English soldiers is replaced by a cold, professional rapacity. This is part of their compensation package. A mainstream historical fact is that mercenary contracts often included implicit or explicit rights to plunder. The promise of loot was a key recruiting tool. You experienced this firsthand. A group of Flemish mercenaries takes over the remains of the village alehouse. They demand wine, not ale, and when told there is none, they beat the alewife. They gamble with strange coins, their laughter sharp and cruel. They treat you and your fellow villagers with a contempt that is somehow worse than simple aggression. You're not even worthy of their anger. You're just part of the scenery, inconveniences to be shoved aside. The language barrier makes it even more terrifying. You cannot reason with them, cannot plead. You are nothing to them. Historians still argue about the true scale and impact of mercenary involvement in the Wars of the Roses. Some scholars suggest their numbers were relatively small and their role has been exaggerated. Others point to specific campaigns like Margaret of Anjou's Great Northern Host of 1461, which included many Scots and border raiders, and which gained a notorious reputation for pillaging its way south through England. This army was so destructive that it may have actually turned the population of London against the Lancastrian cause, contributing to their decision to welcome Edward IV. The presence of these foreign soldiers ignites a particular kind of resentment and fear, tapping into a deep-seated English xenophobia. The war, which was already a confusing mess of whether it's true or not, you believe it. Everyone believes it. It feels true to the new, ruthless spirit of the age. This new ruthlessness trickles down. The king demands absolute loyalty. There is no room for dissent. You feel the change in the nervous energy of your local lord, who now has to navigate a court filled with suspicion. Spies are said to be everywhere. A careless word against the king is not just foolish, it is fatal. The justice system, already arbitrary, now becomes an instrument of political terror. Executions for treason become more common, often with flimsy evidence. A quirky but telling tidbit of Richard's brief reign is his creation of the Council of the North. On the surface, it was an administrative body designed to bring better governance and justice to the region. However, it was also a tool of immense personal power, staffed by his loyal northern retainers, the men who had helped him seize the throne. It was a way of centralising his control and projecting his authority in a way that bypassed traditional structures. To his supporters, it was a sign of his commitment to good governance. To his enemies, it was a sign of his dictatorial nature, a private kingdom within the kingdom. You feel this new harshness in small ways. Tax collection becomes more efficient, more relentless. The king's officials seem more numerous and less open to persuasion or bribery. There is a sense of order being imposed from above, but it is a brittle, fearful order. It is the order of a regime that knows it is built on a shaky foundation and must use fear to shore up its walls. The reign of Richard III marks the psychological climax of the war's brutality. It's as if the decades of violence, betrayal, and moral decay have finally culminated in a leader who embodies it all. The previous kings and lords, for all their faults, seem to operate within a certain set of conventions. Richard seems to have torn up the rulebook. He has shown that there is no line that cannot be crossed, no sacred bond that cannot be broken. Not family, not loyalty, not the life of a child. In the pursuit of absolute power, you live under a king who is feared, not loved, and you sense that a kingdom ruled by fear cannot last. A final, desperate gamble is coming, one that will either cement this new brutality or shatter it completely. The reign of King Richard III is a tense, brittle affair. The kingdom is orderly, but it is the order of a graveyard, quiet and heavy with fear. You sense, as everyone does, that something has to break. The rumours of the murdered princes have stained Richard's crown, and his enemies both at home and abroad are circling. The focus of these hostile whispers is a new name, a man who has been a political exile his entire life. Henry Tudor, the Earl of Richmond. He is the seriousness that borders on grim. He is not a man known for his charm or easy smiles. He is known for getting things done, no matter the cost. Then, King Edward IV, still in his prime, dies suddenly. The throne is supposed to pass to his young son, the 12-year-old Edward V. Richard of Gloucester is named Lord Protector, tasked with governing the kingdom until the boy king comes of age. At first, this seems like a moment of stability. The king's loyal brother will ensure a smooth transition. But the atmosphere quickly sours. The political air, which had been relatively calm, grows thick with tension and conspiracy. The first jolt comes with the arrest of the Queen's family, the Woodvilles. They are the relatives of King Edward's wife, Elizabeth Woodville, and they are widely disliked by the old nobility as ambitious upstarts. Richard, acting with lightning speed, intercepts the young king on his way to London, seizes his prominent Woodville uncles and half-brothers, and has them imprisoned. The official reason is that they were plotting against him, the Lord Protector, but to you, hearing the news, it feels like a purge, a wolf cleaning out the henhouse. The young king and his even younger brother, the Duke of York, are lodged in the Tower of London. It is, you are told, for their own safety, and in preparation for the coronation. But the Tower is not just a palace, it is a fortress, a prison, and the boy's coronation day keeps getting postponed. The sense of unease deepens into palpable fear. Powerful men who were loyal to the old king are suddenly arrested and executed without trial, most famously Lord Hastings, who was dragged from a council meeting and beheaded on a block of wood. Then comes the bombshell. A sermon is preached in London, claiming that King Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid. The argument is that Edward had a prior contract to marry another woman, making his children illegitimate, and if the princes are bastards, they cannot inherit the throne. The next in line is the Lord Protector himself. A carefully orchestrated public petition begs Richard to take the crown, which after a show of reluctance he accepts. He becomes King Richard III. The speed and ruthlessness of this takeover are breathtaking. It's a political coup of shocking efficiency. The brutality feels different now. Before, the violence was often chaotic, the result of battle or undisciplined armies. This is cold, calculated and clinical. It's the violence of the state, wielded with surgical precision against any perceived threat. The political climate, which was already harsh, shifts into something darker, more paranoid. The mainstream historical fact, and the central mystery of this reign, is the fate of the two young princes in the Tower. After the summer of 1483, they are never seen again. Did Richard have his own nephews murdered to secure his throne? For centuries this has been the traditional view, immortalised by Shakespeare's unforgettable villain. Historians still argue fiercely about it. Ricardians defend the king, suggesting others had the motive and opportunity to kill the boys, perhaps the Duke of Buckingham or even the future Henry Tudor. But at the time, the rumour spreads like poison. The king is a murderer, a man who killed innocent children to steal a crown. Lancastrian claimant, a long shot with a weak claim to the throne, but he is the only alternative to Richard's fearful rule. For 2 years, the tension builds. There are rebellions that sputter and fail, but the plotting continues. Then, in the late summer of 1485, the news arrives like a lightning strike. Henry Tudor has landed. He has arrived on the coast of Wales with a small, motley army of French mercenaries and English exiles. He is marching inland, gathering support as he goes. Once again the summons comes. King Richard, the formidable military commander, calls his banners. You are conscripted again, an old hand at this miserable business now. You are given your rusty bill and your smelly jack and forced to march. But this time, the mood is different. In previous campaigns, there was at least a sense of regional loyalty, of fighting for your lord. Now, you are marching for a king whom many of you fear and despise. The soldiers around you are sullen, their conversations quiet and nervous. There is a notable lack of enthusiasm for the cause. You march towards the centre of the country, to a place near the town of Market Bosworth. The two armies converge and you find yourself setting up camp on the slope of a hill. Across a marshy plain you can see Tudor's smaller army, but it's not just two armies. Off to the side, a third, powerful force is arrayed under the command of the Stanley family. A mainstream historical fact of the Battle of Bosworth Field is the pivotal role of the Stanleys. They were powerful northern magnates who had sworn allegiance to Richard, but whose loyalty was deeply suspect. Lord Stanley was Henry Tudor's stepfather. They had brought their forces to the field, but had not yet declared for either side. Everyone, from the kings down to a lowly foot soldier like you, is watching them, waiting to see which way they will jump. The fate of the kingdom hangs on their decision. The battle begins in a confusing piecemeal way. There is an exchange of cannon fire, the great iron balls tearing through the ranks. Richard's massive army, superior in numbers, begins to advance. You are part of the great block of infantry, the main battle, commanded by Richard himself. You trudge forward into the marshy ground, the mud sucking at your shoes. The fighting is as brutal and chaotic as you remember from other battles, but it's laced with a new element, uncertainty. You fight the men in front of you, but you're constantly glancing over your shoulder at the Stanley banners, still motionless on the hill. Are they our allies, or are they about to crash into our flank? The mistrust runs all the way to the top. King Richard is wearing his crown over his helmet, a defiant gesture to show that he is the anointed king, but it also makes him a conspicuous target. Then Richard sees his chance. He spots Henry Tudor across the field, protected by only a small contingent of bodyguards. In a moment of incredible, reckless bravery, or perhaps desperation, Richard decides to end the war with a single cavalry charge. He gathers his household knights and personally leads a charge directly at his rival. You stop fighting to watch this incredible cinematic moment. A king, wearing his crown, leading a charge to kill the pretender with his own hand. For a moment, it looks like it will work. Richard and his men crash into Tudor's bodyguard with ferocious force. They cut down Tudor's standard-bearer. Richard himself is said to have been within a sword's length of Henry. It is the decisive moment of the entire war, happening right before your eyes, and then the Stanleys make their move. Seeing Richard committed and vulnerable, Sir William Stanley finally orders his fresh troops to charge. But they don't charge at Henry Tudor. They charge directly into the flank of King Richard's personal retinue. The betrayal is absolute and decisive. Richard's desperate gamble has become a trap. The sight of the Stanley banners joining the enemy sends a shockwave of despair through your army. A cry of treason goes up. Richard's men are now hopelessly outnumbered, surrounded. The battle turns into a slaughter. Richard's horse is killed under him, but he refuses to flee. They say he was offered a horse to escape, but he refused, shouting that he would die a king. And he did. You see him, fighting on foot, unhorsed but defiant, until he is overwhelmed and hacked to death by a swarm of enemy soldiers. Historians still argue about the exact sequence of events at Bosworth. The terrain, the precise movements of the armies, and the motivations of the key players are all subjects of intense debate. But for you on the field, the result is brutally clear. Your king is dead. The Stanley betrayal has shattered the morale of your army. What was a battle a moment ago now becomes a rout. Everyone around you throws down their weapons and runs. You run with them, not even thinking, just pure survival instinct. Quirky, and now legendary, tidbit is what happened next. After the battle, Richard's battered crown was supposedly found hanging on a hawthorn bush. It was picked up and placed on Henry Tudor's head, right there on the battlefield. Lord Stanley, the great betrayer, was the one to crown the new king. The new dynasty was born in blood, mud, and treachery. You don't stay to see it. You are running for your life, trying to melt back into the countryside to get as far away from this disaster as possible. The war that has consumed your entire adult life has ended in a confusing, desperate, and treacherous melee. A king is dead, and a new one has been made. But as you flee, you're not filled with hope for a new beginning. You're just a survivor, wondering if this new king will finally bring peace, or if this is just another turn of the bloody relentless wheel. You make it away from the bloody chaos of Bosworth Field, a survivor once again. You discard the livery of the dead king, a white boar badge that is now a symbol of treason, and you melt back into the broken countryside. A new king, Henry VII, sits on the throne. The war is over, peace has come, at least that is the official story. But as you limp your way back to what is left of your village, you discover that the deep festering wounds of a 30-year civil war cannot be healed by a single battle. The victory of a new king does not magically end the violence overnight. The first few months of the new reign are filled with a fragile, nervous hope. King Henry VII moves quickly to consolidate his power. He marries Elizabeth of York, the daughter of the Yorkist King Edward IV, symbolically uniting the warring houses of the White Rose and the Red. This union is a brilliant piece of political branding, creating the new Tudor Rose that you start to see on official proclamations. It's a promise of unity, of an end to the division. But you, who have seen allegiances shift like the wind, are sceptical. A symbol is not the same as reality. Your old fears remain. just with new names attached. The countryside is still a lawless mess. The remnants of Richard III's defeated army have not simply vanished. Many have turned to banditry, bitter and dangerous men with nothing left to lose. The private feuds between local lords, which had been inflamed by the wider war, do not simply cease. Lord Fitzherbert, whose family had feuded with your old Yorkist lord for generations, might now use the Tudor victory as an excuse to settle old scores once and for all, launching a fresh raid under the guise of rooting out Ricardian traitors. The violence has become endemic, a chronic disease in the kingdom's bloodstream. The new king's hold on the throne is far from secure, and this insecurity breeds a new wave of paranoia and unrest. The mainstream historical fact is that Henry VII's reign was plagued by a series of Yorkist plots and rebellions, often centred on pretenders, young men who claimed to be one of the lost princes from the Tower. The first major one is a boy named Lambert Simnel, a baker's son who was passed off as the Earl of Warwick, a Yorkist heir whom Henry actually had locked up in the Tower. This absurd plot gathers surprising momentum. The Yorkist lords in Ireland crown Simnel as King Edward VI. They gather an army of Irish warriors and German mercenaries and invade England. Once again, the summons goes out. Once again, you are faced with the prospect of being dragged from your field to fight. This time, however, you are lucky. The rebellion is crushed relatively quickly by King Henry's forces at the Battle of Stoke Field, a bloody affair often considered the true last battle of the Wars of the Roses. Henry VII's response to this rebellion is a masterclass in political calculation. A quirky and telling detail is his treatment of the pretender himself. Instead of executing the young Lambert Simnel, which would have made him a martyr, Henry did something far more humiliating. He pardoned him and gave him a job in the royal kitchens as a scullion, a pot washer. It was a gesture of contemptuous mercy, designed to show how little he feared the boy. Every time a lord came to a royal banquet, they would see the king they had crowned now turning a spit, a living symbol of their failed rebellion. But then comes another pretender, Perkin Warbeck, who claims to be Richard, the younger of the two princes in the Tower. His challenge to the throne lasts for years, supported by various European rulers who wish to destabilise Henry's England. This means more fear, more taxes for defence, more suspicion. Anyone who expresses even a hint of sympathy for the old Yorkist cause is liable to be arrested for treason. The new peace feels an awful lot like the old war, just with more spies and fewer pitched battles. Historians still argue about the nature of Henry Tudor's kingship. Was he a new monarch, a moderniser who brought medieval chaos to an end and ushered in a new age of stability? Or was he simply a more efficient and ruthless version of the kings who came before him, a man whose reign was just as insecure and brutal, but who was better at propaganda? From your perspective, life under the new Tudor peace is a mixed bag. There are fewer armies marching through your fields, which is a profound relief. But the king's hand is heavy. His tax collectors are notoriously efficient and rapacious. His justice is swift and merciless. You see this new, centralised ruthlessness in action. The king is determined to break the power of the feuding nobles who caused the war. He passes strict laws against livery and maintenance, the system of keeping private armies of retainers. He summons powerful lords before his new terrifying court, the Court of Star Chamber, and fines them into bankruptcy for any sign of defiance. Your own local lord is a shadow of his former self. He no longer has a large retinue of armed men swaggering about. He is humbled, fearful of the king's displeasure. This makes your own life safer from his whims, but it also replaces the familiar local tyranny with a more distant, impersonal and inescapable state tyranny. The fear hasn't gone away, it has just changed its address. It no longer lives in the neighbouring valley with Lord Fitzherbert. It lives in London with a cold, calculating king who sees everything and forgets nothing. The brutal, chaotic violence of the war is slowly being replaced by the brutal, orderly violence of the state. You are safer, perhaps, but you are less free. You have traded the hot-blooded chaos of war for the cold-blooded peace of a master who will tolerate no dissent. It is an improvement, but it is not the gentle, prosperous peace you had once dreamed of. The old fears linger, and the scars of the war are a constant reminder that the world can be turned upside down in an instant. Everyone has lost someone. Everyone has endured hardship. A collective sense of grief hangs over the land, unspoken but ever present. Historians still argue about the true death toll of the Wars of the Roses. The chroniclers of the time were prone to exaggeration, but even the most conservative estimates suggest that a significant percentage of the English nobility was killed. The losses among common soldiers like you are impossible to calculate, but were undoubtedly immense. Was it a war of nobles that barely touched the common folk, or a total war that devastated the entire country? Looking at the empty cottages and the haunted eyes of your neighbours, you have no doubt about the answer. A quirky, yet poignant symbol of this attempt to reckon with the past is the changing nature of effigies on tombs. In the coming years, you will see a shift in the way nobles are memorialised. The proud, armoured effigies of knights ready for battle begin to be replaced by cadaver tombs. These are tombs that feature two effigies, one of the noble in their prime on top, and another below depicting their decaying corpse, often complete with worms and rotting flesh. It is a stark memento mori, a reminder of death, a morbid reflection on the vanity of earthly glory from a generation that had seen just how quickly that glory could turn to dust and decay. You are old now. Your body aches from a lifetime of hard labour and the lingering effects of old wounds and malnutrition. You sit outside your cottage in the evening sun, watching your grandchildren play. They are a new generation, born into the king's peace. They have only heard of the war as stories, tales of distant kings and battles that sound both terrifying and exciting. They cannot understand the reality. You look at their innocent faces and feel a fierce protective urge. You have paid the price for their peace, a price written in blood, fear, and sorrow. You carry the cost of the war in your bones and your memories, and in the faces of the friends who are no longer there to share the quiet of the evening with you. The twilight of your life unfolds in a world that is both familiar and strangely new. The raw, chaotic brutality of the wars has been replaced by something else, something colder and more systematic. The brutal peace of the Tudor state. King Henry VII and his son, Henry VIII, after him, are determined that the chaos you lived through will never happen again. They achieve this not through reconciliation and gentle persuasion, but through a calculated and often ruthless application of centralised power. You're safer now, but you're also more thoroughly controlled than ever before. The new Tudor peace, with its heavy-handed justice and ever-watchful king, slowly takes root. The open warfare has ceased, the pretenders have been dealt with, and a fragile sense of normalcy begins to return. Now, in the relative quiet, you and your generation begin the grim, silent task of counting the terrible cost. The war was not a storm that passed, leaving the air clean. It was a plague that decimated the population, poisoned the land, and left deep, invisible scars on the minds of the survivors. You look around your village and see the ghosts. So many faces are gone. The friends you grew up with, the men who marched away with you that first time so long ago, most of them never came back. They lie in unmarked mass graves near places like Towton, Barnet and Bosworth. Their families have lived with a gaping uncertainty for years, which has now hardened into a permanent, aching loss. The village is populated by widows, by children who never knew their fathers, and by old men who have outlived their sons. There is a demographic hole, a lost generation of young men that will take decades to fill. The physical landscape bears the marks of the conflict everywhere you look. You see the crumbling remains of a tower that was knocked down during a siege. You pass fields that are still not fully recovered from being trampled and burned, their soil soured and unproductive. The roads, though safer now from large bands of outlaws, are still in a state of utter disrepair. The mainstream historical fact is the sheer economic cost of the wars. Decades of diverted resources, destroyed infrastructure, and disrupted trade had left England impoverished. The great slump you lived through has only just begun to ease, and the recovery is painfully slow. The nobles who led the slaughter have paid a terrible price themselves. The great families that dominated the kingdom when you were a boy, the Beauforts, the Hollands, the Staffords, have been decimated. Entire male lines have been wiped out through battle, execution, and acts of attainder. You see your own local lord, a man from a once proud family now humbled and heavily in debt to the crown. He is a shadow of his ancestors, a testament to the fact that the war was a self-destructive frenzy for the aristocracy. The king, Henry VII, has been a master at profiting from this, absorbing their lands and their power into the crown, ensuring no noble will ever be powerful enough to challenge the throne again. But the most profound costs are the ones you cannot see. The psychological scars on your generation are deep and permanent. You are a man who has seen and done things that no heroic ballad could ever capture. You have seen the casual brutality of the battlefield, the slow agony of starvation, the cold finality of disease. These memories don't just fade away, they visit you in the dead of night. You wake up sweating from a dream of the chaos at Towton or the terror of the siege. This condition had no name then, but today we would call it post-traumatic stress disorder. For you, it is just a part of who you are now, a constant low-humming darkness in the back of your mind. You see this trauma manifested in your community. There is a hardness, a cynicism that wasn't there before. People are less trusting, more guarded. The easy community spirit of your youth, the shared festivals and communal work, feels like a distant memory from another world. The most visible change is the humbling of the nobility. Your local lord, once a petty king in his own right, is now little more than a landlord and a local administrator for the crown. The old system of bastard feudalism, with its private armies and liveried retainers, has been systematically dismantled. A mainstream historical fact is the Tudors' vigorous use of bonds and recognizances. This was a system of financial coercion. The king would force a powerful noble to sign a document acknowledging a massive, often arbitrary debt to the crown. The debt would be suspended as long as the noble behaved, but if he stepped out of line, the king could demand payment and ruin him overnight. It was financial blackmail on a national scale, a way of keeping the aristocracy on a very short, very tight leash. You feel the effects of this new order in your everyday life. The king's justice is now inescapable. Itinerant royal judges, the assizes, arrive with more regularity and more power than ever before. The local manorial court, which was once the primary source of law, now deals only with the most minor infractions. For anything serious, you are subject to the king's law, a law that is applied with a new, terrifying consistency. There is a sense of order, yes, but it is an order born of fear. The gibbets at the crossroads are no longer just rotting relics. They are frequently occupied, a constant reminder of the state's power. This new piece is also expensive. The Tudors are masters of taxation. They invent new and creative ways to extract wealth from the kingdom to fund their new centralised state. You are subject to subsidies, forced loans, and levies that are collected with a relentless efficiency your old lord could only have dreamed of. You have more peace, but you also have less money. The king's peace comes at a price, and you are paying it. The church, which had been a source of spiritual crisis for you during the war, undergoes its own brutal transformation. When Henry VIII breaks with the Pope in Rome to secure his divorce, it unleashes a religious revolution that is just as disruptive in its own way as the political wars you survived. The dissolution of the monasteries is a profound shock. The great abbeys and priories, which have been part of the landscape for centuries, are closed down. Their lands are seized by the crown, and their immense wealth is used to fill the king's coffers. For you, this has a direct impact. The local monastery might have been a source of charity, a hospital for the sick, or a major employer in the region. Now it is a ruin, its monks and nuns cast out, its charitable functions gone. A quirky, yet devastating consequence of the dissolution was the loss of knowledge. The monastic libraries, which were the main repositories of books and learning in the kingdom, were broken up. Their priceless manuscripts sold for scrap, used to wrap pies, or simply left to rot. It was a cultural catastrophe, a burning of the nation's hard drive. Historians still argue about the nature of the Tudor state. Was it a Tudor despotism, a tyrannical regime that trampled on the rights of its subjects? Or was it the necessary foundation of the modern English nation-state, a harsh but essential medicine to cure the disease of aristocratic anarchy you lived through? From your vantage point, it feels like both. You appreciate the fact that you no longer have to fear Lord Fitzherbert's raiders, but you now fear the king's tax collector and the king's judge. The brutality has not vanished. It has been monopolised. The random violence of 1,000 petty lords has been replaced by the organised violence of the state. When a rebellion against Henry VIII's religious policies breaks out in the north, the pilgrimage of grace, the king's response is swift and merciless. He promises pardons and then, once the rebels have dispersed, he hunts them down and executes hundreds. Martial law is declared. It is a terrifying display of the new centralised power. The king is demonstrating that he, and he alone, now holds the legitimate right to violence. You live out your final years in this new, more orderly England. It is a land where the roads are safer, the currency is more stable, and the threat of civil war has receded. But it is also a land where your life is more regimented, more closely watched, and more heavily taxed. The brutal lessons of the Wars of the Roses have been well learned by the new masters. They learned that power, to be secure, must be absolute. You, a survivor of the chaos, are now a subject of the order that rose from its ashes. You have traded the fangs of the wolves for the cage of the shepherd. It is a better life, but the memory of the wildness and the price paid to tame it never truly leaves you. You are an old man now, sitting on a rough-hewn bench outside your cottage door. The evening sun is warm on your face and the air is filled with the familiar scents of wood smoke and damp earth. Your grandchildren are playing nearby, their laughter a sound that feels like a balm on your soul. The world is quiet. The king's peace holds. From this vantage point, looking back across the chasm of the years, the person you were in the beginning, that naive young farmer who worried about the rain, seems like a stranger from a different lifetime. Sometimes you catch yourself watching your grandson play fighting with a stick, and for a fleeting, sickening moment, you don't see a child's game. You see the clumsy weight of the billhook in your own hands, the terror in the eyes of the man lunging at you, the jarring wet impact as the blacksmith saved your life. The memory is as sharp and clear as if it were yesterday, a ghost that lives behind your eyes. You have to blink hard to bring yourself back to the gentle evening sun, to the reality of a child who will likely never have to know what that stick could truly be used for. You eat your evening meal, a simple but filling stew with actual meat in it, on a piece of decent wheaten bread. And as you chew, you remember the taste of famine bread, the gritty texture of acorns and sawdust, the gnawing, hollow agony of true hunger. This simple meal feels like a king's feast in comparison. You have seen your world utterly destroyed and then slowly, painstakingly rebuilt. You have lived through the end of an age. Own breathing. Allow the echoes of that distant, violent past to become a soft, rumbling drone, a background noise that only serves to deepen the profound peace of your own comfortable bed. There are no armies on the march tonight, no alarms to be raised. There is only the stillness of the room, the softness of your pillow, and the gentle pull of sleep which promises a world without fear, without struggle, without pain. Let your mind drift on that peaceful thought, letting go of the story, letting go of the day, and easing into the deep and restorative quiet of the night. You think of the great lords, the ones whose ambitions fueled the fire that burned your world. York, Somerset, Warwick the Kingmaker, Richard III. They are all gone, all dust. Their great houses are humbled, their castles quiet. They played their great game, and in the end they all lost. The only winner was the house that nobody saw coming, the Tudors, who picked up the bloody crown from a hawthorn bush and forged a new kind of power from the wreckage. A mainstream historical fact you have lived through is the creation of the Tudor myth, the idea, promoted endlessly by the new dynasty, that they had rescued England from a dark age of chaos and restored a golden age of peace. It's a good story. And after everything you've been through, you're too tired to argue with a good story. The local people have their own myths. They say the field at Bosworth is haunted, but on stormy nights you can still hear the clash of steel and the final desperate cries of a dying king. They say the souls of the tens of thousands of men buried in the pits at Towton can never rest. A quirky, yet understandable legacy of the war is how the geography of the fighting has become part of the island's folklore, the trauma of the land seeping into its stories. You don't know if you believe in ghosts, but you know that the past is never truly dead. It lives in you. It lives in the very soil of the kingdom. Historians, in some distant future, will continue to debate whether the Tudor myth was a genuine belief in a new golden age or a masterful piece of propaganda designed to legitimise a usurper's dynasty. You chuckle at the thought. You don't need a historian to tell you what it was. It was both. The peace is real. The fear is real. The new order is better than the chaos, but it is an order paid for with the blood and freedom of your generation. You know the truth because you are the receipt. You are a relic, a living testament to a time of brutality that the new, more orderly world is already beginning to forget. You have been a peasant, a soldier, a survivor. You have been a Yorkist and a Lancastrian, sometimes in the same week. You have starved and bled and despaired. You have seen your faith in God and man crumble to nothing, and have slowly, cautiously, learn to find a small measure of peace not in grand promises from kings or priests, but in the simple, immediate things, a grandchild's laugh, a full belly, a warm fire, you're one of the last who truly remembers. You're a bridge of scarred flesh and bone connecting the brutal past to this fragile present. And as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet fields, you close your eyes. Your long hard journey is almost over, and so, as our journey through this brutal age comes to its gentle close, feel the weight of those years begin to lift from your own shoulders. The cold dampness of the wattle and daub cottage, the gnawing hunger, the terror of the battlefield, let them all dissolve and fade away like figures in a mist. You're not a peasant cowering in a war-torn land. You're safe and warm, surrounded by the quiet comforts of your own time. The only sounds are the soft hum of the fan, the distant murmur of the world outside your window, and the steady, reassuring rhythm of your